Howdy, folks. We're going to get started here. I see the networking has already begun. That'd be good. Yeah, that'd be good. All right, I'm going to start calling out names. Jacob and Jeff, let's get going. Oh, just anywhere there's a seat. Yeah. All right, we're going to get going. You can tell it's a good group. Yep. Okay. I hate to be the bad guy. We are going to get started. This is an old trick where you just start talking and then we'll just see what happens. Great. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get started with the program here. Thank you. Thank you, whoever whistled. I am not a whistler. Thank you for being here, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for the incredible turnout and the response to this event. We're very excited to bring this group together. Thank you to all of our presenters and panelists. And with that, I'll go ahead and launch into it. And I would ask everybody, please silence your phones. Quick housekeeping notes. Restrooms out this door to my right, your left. Emergency exits are in both directions. If there's anything you need that's emergency related, we do have RUPD here with us. Thank you very much for joining us as well. With that, I would like to introduce Rice University's Provost, Amy Dittmer, to get us started with her remarks. Amy is the Howard Hughes Provost and Executive Vice President for Academic Affairs at Rice University. She is a distinguished scholar with an extensive background in economics, finance, and university administration. Professor of Economics at Rice's Jones Graduate School of Business. And as Provost, she oversees Rice's academic enterprise and recently led the university's strategic planning efforts, establishing the university's direction for the next decade. Amy, thank you for being with us and thank you for your remarks.
All right. Well, the first thing I'd like to do is take the giant picture of myself off the screen. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's wonderful to have all of you here with us at Rice. And it is my distinct honor to welcome you to this pivotal event hosted by Rice University and Rice's Baker Institute for Public Policy. Today, we gather to address one of the most pressing issues of our time, the state of the American brain. First and foremost, before I get started, I want to thank our distinguished guests, many of which are sitting right here in the front row, as well as throughout the room. Among many others, I'm sure, we are extremely privileged to have with us Congressman Morgan Luttrell, Chairman Greg Bonin, MD, NIH Brain Initiative Director John Nye. Your presence here underscores the importance of the dialogue across disciplines and across different stakeholders, and the importance of this is deeply, deeply grateful from us and your participation here. I also want to give a really special thank you to Congressman Luttrell, who also joined us at the Baker Institute in March and is a champion of many of these issues. Congressman Luttrell, your commitment specifically to advancing this conversation in the 21st century American brain is truly commendable. Your return to this forum signifies a dedication to building on the successes of the first event, and we at Rice are excited to continue this journey to you. Thank you. So Rice University is at the forefront today of the brain-positive economy transition. We aim to stop and reverse the loss of brain capital through pioneering efforts such as the Neuropolicy Program. Today is a testament to the program's success as we integrate new neuroscience-inspired policy approaches at multiple scales at Rice University, in the Texas Medical Center, in Houston, in Texas, and at the federal level. Earlier today, our special guests were, and I was able to go with them, got a tour of many of the amazing labs that are here in this building. Rice's Neuroengineering Initiative, a collaborative program that brings together the brightest minds in neuroscience engineering and related fields. The researchers work closely with clinicians and patients to study neurofunctions and create breakthroughs in how to diagnose, treat, and prevent diseases and disorders such as Alzheimer's and depression. And I want to commend those that planned the tour. I thought it was really impressive how they actually took us from an overview to basic science to applied science to things that are out in the world and being tested today. And so that progression was really impactful. These conditions such as Alzheimer's and depression and so many other neurological conditions impact so many people. And Rice's Neuroengineering Initiative improves their lives by restoring and extending the capabilities of the human brain. The work that has been achieved in only 5 years since the initiative was founded is incredibly remarkable. Building on this strength, earlier this year, Houston Methodist and Rice launched the Center for Neurosystem Restoration. This is an interdisciplinary center for neuroscience research and treatment innovation. The center advances state-of-the-art neurological conditions, advances care for state-of-the-art neurological conditions by bringing scientists, clinicians, engineers, and surgeons to tackle medical challenges such as stroke recovery and spinal cord injury. In addition to that, the importance of the cross-disciplinary efforts were seen today on our tour and through the work of Rice's Psychological Sciences Department and the TLL Temple Foundation Neuroplasticity Lab. This department and this lab uniquely blends the science of the human brain with the science of human behavior and performance. Our breadth of research interest creates a unique learning opportunity and research environment. We are working together across all of the disciplines to enhance support for cross-disciplinary research that truly I've never been at another university that can do as well as Rice, that will advance and weave together research, education, innovation, and policy. A comprehensive approach like ours is needed. The situation for the American brain is dire. Mental health inequities are projected to cost the United States a staggering $14 trillion by 2040, according to a report by Deloitte. This forecasted economic burden is a stark reminder of the critical need to comprehensively address mental health issues. Equally alarming, health and long-term care costs for people living with Alzheimer's and dementia are projected to reach $360 billion this year and nearly $1 trillion by 2050, according to the Alzheimer's Association. This disease it currently affects 6.9 million Americans. 1 in 9 individuals that are over 65 suffer from Alzheimer's or dementia. And these numbers are expected to double in the next 35 years. These figures highlight the immense financial and societal impact of neurodegenerative diseases on our nation and our state, not to mention the emotional and personal toll on families and caregivers. This struggle is not only important for Rice and for our state and for our country, it is deeply personal to me as well. As a young adult, I watched my grandfather struggle with Alzheimer's for over a decade, 7 years of which he was in a nursing home and did not know any of us. Last year, my mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's and found to have the APOE4 gene. But there is amazing hope in the United States right now. In 2023, the FDA approved the first treatment that was found to potentially slow the progression of Alzheimer's, and just a few months after that, my mom began her infusions. This brings hope to certainly our family as well as all families that are struggling with these brain disorders. To continue this work and to allow America to lead in advancing brain health, it is essential that we not only invest in this research, but that we also develop the next generation of scientists. This means investing in our educational systems as well. Unfortunately, the U.S. education system has significant hurdles. There are key skill deserts across the country where access to high-quality education and training is limited. This is occurring at a time when our brain capital, our brain health, our brain skills are more crucial than ever. Other nations are investing massively in neuroscience, and we cannot afford to fall behind. The president of the National Academies of Science recently noted that American science is in danger of decline while China, as well as other countries, surge. And this puts our economic and national security in peril. And as we see playing out across the globe, education and research are closely linked with economics and national security. At Rice, we are already a leader in clean energy transition, uniquely positioned in the energy capital, and deeply engaged with many other global players. Similarly, with leading researchers across the disciplines and in the Baker Institute, and across the street where we're standing now, with the largest medical center in the world at TNC, Rice is well poised to launch, lead, and execute on the brain-positive economic transition. We can, and we will, unite public, private, and philanthropic stakeholders to advance innovations on every front. Globally, Rice's neuropolicy program is shaping the European Union's approach to brain health and engaging with major European philanthropies that are looking to leverage their capabilities in culture and arts. In close collaboration with Rice's neuropolicy program, Cameroon is advancing the recent Yaoundé Declaration for Brain Economy to the UN General Assembly, and Rice has co-organized the General Assembly's upcoming Brain Days in New York, with senior representatives from the governments of New York, India, Finland, and Cameroon, among others. We are similarly excited about our recent collaboration with the McKinsey Health Institute and European Investment Bank, which is exploring a systemic financing strategy for the brain-positive economic transition. Rice's work on the brain economy and transition comes as we unveil our own strategic plan, which emphasizes premier research and building thriving urban communities, generating sustainable futures, and leading in innovations in health, all of which will be impacted by new technologies and the use of responsible AI, and all of which impact the brain health. To sustain and grow this vital work, we invite funding and resource support. These are the oxygen that keep our efforts alive. As I close today, I want to express our deepest gratitude to Harry Yen and Winnie Gao for their recent $1 million gift to establish the Neuropolicy Program, as well as Benjamin and Winnie Chang, Rob Kaplan, Ronell Golden, and other generous support. Also, a special note of thanks goes to Rice trustee Jim Hackett for his ongoing support and vision for the Neuropolicy Program. I am confident that the insights and the discussions emerging from this evening's stellar panels and keynote address will pave the way for a brighter future for the American brain economy and for all Americans. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. And now I'd like to introduce Dr. John Nye. John Nye is the director of the NIH Brain Research through Advancing Innovative Neurotechnologies, or BRAIN Initiative. He has a bachelor's degree in chemistry from Pomona College and a PhD in biology from Caltech. He's spent more than 25 years at Berkeley as a faculty member, has over 70 journal-published scientific articles, 10 U.S. and international patents, and was the director of Berkeley's Neuroscience Graduate Program and the Helen Wills Neuroscience Institute. At the Brain Initiative, he oversees the long-term strategy and day-to-day operations of his team as they strive to revolutionize our understanding of the brain in both health and disease. And I have the task of switching the PowerPoint slides. So everyone hold your breath, because I was a liberal arts major.
Don't look at me. I don't do technology.
Smoothest transition ever. Thank you. Thank you.
Where's the clip?
Thank you, John.
Thanks so much. Thank you. I'd like to thank the organizers for having us here, Provost Dittmar, for these very inspiring opening remarks. I'd be remiss if I didn't make a comment about the tragedy that befell your community yesterday. As a community, you will get through it. It will make you stronger. But it underscores the pressing need to really understand how the human brain works and how we can intervene to avoid future tragedy. So this, I think, is why we're all here today. I'll start out by stating the obvious and a truism. Our brains are our most important asset. Just keep that in mind. The human brain is arguably the most complex and powerful and energy-efficient computer known to humankind. 86 billion neurons with a B. Double maybe that number of non-neuronal cells making trillions, if not hundreds of trillions of connections together, give rise to everything that makes us human. Our thoughts, our emotions, our ability to store and retrieve memories, our ability to see into the future, everything that makes us human as a species, but also the differences that make us as individuals different from each other. And understanding this mystery is so complex on the order of understanding the cosmos, and the challenge is we don't yet have the tools to fully understand how this amazing computer works. And so its very complexity also makes us so vulnerable to disease. And this is the inspiration behind the US Brain Initiative, which is that we all know somebody who lives with a brain disorder. We just heard from personal accounts. 1 in 3 Americans are living with some disorder of the central nervous system. That means that everybody in this room either is living with a condition or knows someone, has a loved one who has a condition. There are hundreds, if not now thousands, as we understand more about the basis of these conditions, and the economic costs, never mind the societal and personal costs, are tremendous. And cures cannot come soon enough. Cures that maybe a few years ago we could think might be cured in our children or grandchildren's lifetime. Now we have the opportunity to do that now. So here's a photograph of the Milky Way. There are estimated to be about 100 billion stars in the Milky Way. Now, since the time of Galileo, astronomers have been peering into the sky, and over the centuries have developed ever more powerful telescopes that can detect and understand the birth and death of stars and the lifetime and their chemistries. And what we need for neuroscience are better telescopes. We need the better tools to understand this constellation of cell types in the human brain. This is a study recently published from Dr. Adeline and colleagues from the Allen Institute, one of our very strong partners in the Brain Initiative, that are starting to build these new tools, these new telescopes, to peer into the very essence of the human brain, to understand how these cells, how these stars, billions of stars, actually give rise to human thought and cognition. The mission of the NIH Brain Research through Advancing Neurotechnologies initiative is to revolutionize our understanding of the human brain in health and disease by developing new technologies, these new telescopes. The overall effort, the US effort, was announced in 2013, first awards announced in 2014, and represents a partnership. And this is something I want to emphasize here, the partnership between 5 US federal agencies and private foundations. And it enables the broader neuroscience enterprise as well as the biotech community. We can talk about the economies here. And thanks to very strong congressional support, since 2014, we've been able to invest in over 1,600 projects and with $3.5 billion and counting. And it's not just the amount of money, it's how we've been applying it. So there are 27 institutes and centers at the NIH. About a dozen of them are involved in neuroscience research. The Brain Initiative is a special program that spans 10 of those neuroscience-focused institutes. And our goal here is to develop and leverage new technologies to enable discoveries about how the brain works, to foster what we call a tool-driven revolution, to identify and test new therapies for human brain disorders, and to change the way we're doing science to maintain our global competitiveness. And you heard about this just a moment ago. So you can think about different kinds of revolutions. There's concept-driven revolutions where you can explain old things in new ways, but if you have new tools, you have new microscopes, you can actually discover new things that have yet to be explained. That will be at the crux of what we need to understand. So this is what we're doing in the BRAIN Initiative. We've laid down the foundation for 4 big projects that we expect will transform the way we conduct neuroscience research for generations to come. If you think about the brain as the marvelous computer it is, if you want to understand how it works and what goes wrong during disease, you have to know, you need a parts list, you need a wiring diagram, you need basically an instruction manual, and that's what we're about right here. So the parts list, we've stood up a very large project to characterize all the cell types in the human brain. We have a complete inventory of all the cell types in the mouse brain. We just accomplished that. We have a draft atlas for the human brain, and the best is yet to come there. We are developing the technologies to develop this wiring diagram. What are all the trillions of connections in the brain that give rise to all that we do as humans? And then you need a way to get in there and start asking questions, but ultimately to repair the brain. And now we have this, what we call armamentarium for precision brain cell access. You've all heard about various stimulation technologies, gene therapy technologies. We need to be able to get into individual cell types to deal with these issues around circuits. And then finally, we just stood up what we call this brain behavior quantification and synchronization program, which is to get real-time readouts of behavior, better readouts of behavior, to synchronize it up with high-quality neurophysiological recordings so we can understand the causal basis of behavior and to develop better closed-loop systems for modulating these in mental health disorders. Let me give you a taste of things to come and what the challenge is. This is a representation of about 1.5 cubic millimeters of human cortex. This is a study that was conducted by Dr. Jeff Lichtman at Harvard University, together with Dr. Viren Jain at Google Research. Again, a great public-private partnership. 57,000 neurons, making, I think, 150 million connections. Amazing information here. This cubic millimeter piece of brain, about the size of a grain of rice, just that static image occupies over a petabyte of data, okay? A lot of advanced AI technologies have gone into analyzing these data, a lot more yet to come. Our goal is to make a complete wiring diagram of a mouse brain and eventually scale up to humans. What does that mean? A mouse brain is about 1,000 times larger. So a petabyte is 1,000 terabytes, so that's 1,000 laptop computers. To do a whole mouse brain, just a static map, never mind understanding anything about it, is going to be 1 million laptops worth of computers, and then a human brain another 1,000 times more. And we don't yet have the technology to do that. It's going to involve new AI algorithms, new ways of handling what we call these exascale data sets. But this is going to be the mother of invention. We're going to develop those technologies to do that. So that's all fine and well. Is it a promissory note? What are we doing for humans today? Well, maybe I don't have to tell this crowd here, but over the last few years, there's been an explosion in deep brain stimulation technologies that have been driven from high-precision circuit mapping, recording technologies, and AI technologies now to read out biomarkers of different mental states that have now been applied far beyond just Parkinson's disease, but also now being applied to our more complex conditions like intractable depression, intractable obsessive-compulsive disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, binge eating disorder, motor recovery after stroke, substance use disorder. Right now, the sky is really the limit. And I just want to highlight 2 recent studies that were published. This is from one of our investigators in California, where they've now made deep brain stimulation for Parkinson's disease better through using an adaptive program, where they're actually measuring and quantifying the patient's day-to-day life at home and being able to fine-tune the stimulation to give them the best possible life they can. And very recently, here's a study from the BrainGate collaboration that we had a role in funding early, where they've now developed some incredible AI technologies that are giving paralyzed patients, for example, this patient with stroke, the ability to communicate with his loved ones in his own voice. So it's really just science fiction kind of approaches that were unthinkable 10 years ago, and now we're seeing reality, and now the challenge is to get it out to as many people as we can. So we're changing the way we're doing science to support these kinds of studies that we do see changing the lives of people today and in the future. And I'll just come back to what I started out with. Our nation's most valuable resource is our brains. We are in a global innovation race. To me, it's not so much a matter of beating the other guy, but we can do it best. I think we have the resources, we have the know-how, we have the ethics, we have the infrastructure to do it. Nobody can do it better than we can, and we need to provide leadership in this area. What's going to come out of this very highly technical and sophisticated analysis of how brains work, both statically as well as dynamically, is we're going to get greater knowledge of natural intelligence, how the most powerful computer works, and apply that to developing the next generation computer architectures. And we know how to do it well, and we know how to do it ethically, and it's our responsibility to take leadership in this area. And then finally, in order to get this done, will require a partnership. The NIH is the largest funder of biomedical research in the country, if not the world, but we can't do it alone. We need other funders at the state, local level. Universities are making a big investment, philanthropy, and industry. And together, I think we can build a robust ecosystem to really not just preserve, but to enhance our brain capital. And with that, I'm looking forward to a great set of panel sessions. So thank you very much. And you can find us at that website. Yep, thanks.
Thank you, John. At this time, we're going to have our first panel come up. Our first panel is titled From Neuroweapons to Neuroshields, Safeguarding Brain Capital for National Security. I would ask our moderator, Vinod Vidu, please come to the front, and he will be joined by Congressman Morgan Luttrell, Dr. Jeff Ling from UT Dallas, Leanne, and Dr. Greg Woodcock. Please come to the front. Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
Test. Normally when I sit in a room, everybody's looking at me and they're quiet, they're mad at me. But I'm hoping that everybody's going to be in a good mood. I had to throw that out. Everybody's...
Well, you should be the moderator.
Bring the crowd up.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here for this panel. Let me just first read the panel title, From Neuroweapons to Neuroshields, Safeguarding Brain Capital for National Security. Isn't that a mouthful? Well, you can give all the credit to Harris and Nathan for coming up with such a complicated title. But I think our objective here in this panel is to just discuss about how our brain, and I think in Congressman's word before, the gelatinous substance between our ears is going to affect how our economy works and keeps our country safe. I think that's a good discussion going to be here today. And the panelists whose backgrounds are nothing short of extraordinary. I wanted to just read through their pages and pages of their bios, but I think I'll just shrink it down. I think in the case of Congressman Morgan Luttrell, representing the 8th Congressional District, Texas, I just actually went through your life story and trying to summarize everything into one single sentence. Let me try.
Yes, outstanding.
Congressman Luttrell, husband, father, Marine, Navy SEAL, and in his own experience with TBI, turned into a brain scientist. And now he's in Congress as a legislature and Congressional Neuroscience Caucus co-chair. That work?
That's perfect.
Great. You know, I heard Congressman Luttrell speaking many times, and I love when he starts saying, now this is Morgan talking. So we need that unvarnished version of your stories today. Next, Dr. Jeff Ling. Dr. Jeff Ling, just a quick background on Dr. Jeff Ling, a renowned neurologist and retired U.S. Army colonel, co-leads the UT Dallas Center for Brain Health. He founded DARPA's BTO office, the Biological Technologies Office, and pioneered brain-computer interface research. I think this is a fascinating fact. At UT Dallas, with his work, his goal is to double human brain performance within the next decade. If you have time, please make sure you look up his background and search for revolutionizing prosthetics. Fascinating works there. Next, Dr. Lian Yang. She actually represents the industry here. And I think it's a very important aspect to how we are trying to bring the academia, industry, and the government, everything work together. Just a quick background on her. Leanne Young is the Vice President at Applied Research Associates, ARA, specializing in human vulnerability and TBI research. The background in engineering and business. She has led projects on TBIs in blast environments. Previously, she worked for US DoD, Office of Naval Research, and DARPA. She holds a PhD in cognitive neuroscience from the University of Texas at Dallas. Last but not least, Dr. Greg Whitcomb. I actually went through his programs that he's running at DARPA, and I have a story that I'll come back later. Dr. Whitcomb, a DARPA program manager and former Army flight surgeon, began his neuroscience journey during his ophthalmology residency. After 9/11, he joined FBI as a special agent leading national security investigations and research on improvised explosive device, so IED detection and opioid addiction. Now at DARPA, he oversees 5 research programs or more, focused on mental health, aiming for an objective understanding of brain dysfunction. And just quickly about me, I'm just the guy who read their bios and got a bit intimidated.
Killing it.
Right? So I just realized that I have to up my game in life. Now, I think, just a quick disclaimer. For the DoD government-affiliated panel members here, any views are their own personal views today. Now to the panel question. I think I just wanted to go to, maybe start with Congressman Luttrell. I was just looking up all the details of what you went through in your life. I was just curious, when it comes to the idea of neuroeconomy and then how that affects the national security, I was just curious about your thoughts on the opportunities and challenges at a very high level from where you are at this point.
Opportunities and challenges from a congressional level and
Absolutely,
how I see things playing out? That's a great question. Let me lead in with this. So I walked into the labs throughout the day with all my, I'm going to say my colleagues in the room, and you're seeing these young men and women in here that are doing this work that are hungry and they're ambitious. You can tell that they are problem solvers. And my biggest concern, or one of my biggest concerns, is that we're losing our problem solvers. And when it comes to, and you can talk national security, you can talk neuroscience space, you can talk any space whatsoever. But if there's no appetite and aggressiveness with our babies all the way up to us, we will lose. And I don't really think, and I don't know the best way to say this, but when I'm looking at all the folks that I chatted with today, and I'm old enough to call them kids. When I'm looking at these kids, I wonder if they realize how important they are. Because they're advancing technologies and they're creating the next evolution of, well, I'll just say neuroscience, And if we lose the ability to, if we gain the ability, if we give back the ability of an injured brain, think of how important that is. Think about when that soccer mom walks in with her baby and is like, I have a head injury here. Can you fix it? We can't. You know what the answer is now? No. We can decrease symptomatic issues and increase the quality of life, hopefully. But those babies out there will be the ones that figure out how, as you said, this gelatinous substance between our ears contemplates thought, contemplates the contemplation of thought, the last bastion of untouched frontier. And if we figure that out, is that scary? Maybe we're not supposed to understand how this thing works. I'm just being truthful. But at my level, when the problem sets show up in Washington, D.C., and they come from everywhere. If there's a problem set on the planet, it lives and breathes in Washington, D.C. It just does. And I don't care what you're really focused on, it will walk in the door, and you have to provide some sort of lane or guidance on how you're supposed to fix that. And if we don't continue to strive and educate ourselves, more so than the Provost said, the nefarious actors globally that want us, and I mean want us, are doing that. And so I applaud the efforts of all the academics here in how they're educating our children, but man, we cannot let off the gas.
Excellent. Perfect beginning.
Hey, all right.
I think I wanted to go to Jeff Ling, and I'll circle back to some of the stuff that Congressman was saying in a minute. I just wanted to ask, because you have this concept of left of boom. Maybe you can explain the left of boom concept, but more importantly, I wanted to understand from all the things that you have seen in the world of brain initiatives, Houston is always recognized as the capital of energy. What advice would you have for Houston to become the capital of brain initiatives, brain capital?
Well, that's a great question. So Houston itself already is a bastion of remarkable technology, science, and of course medicine. The TMC is world-renowned. Rice itself is a world-renowned institution. You're shared with Baylor and a number of others. So you already have the foundation of what it takes to be premier. In fact, arguably you are premier already. So it's a question of then pivoting and using those remarkable resources you have here. The second thing that really comes into this is finding your place in where you're going to do this, because it's going to be more than just government money, right? I mean, the notion that the government's going to underpin all of it is foolish. It's really foolish. If you actually look at it, the United States, to the NIH alone, has a budget roughly, we'll just round it off, about $50 billion a year. That's a lot of frickin' money. But if you add in all the other sources of funding that's in the United States, actually it is roughly about $150 billion just in biomedical alone. Forget the other stuff. Just biomedical alone is $150 billion. That's a lot of money. How do you leverage that, right? I mean, and that's the important thing. How do you leverage that kind of funding? Texas is a great place to do this. You have a very powerful foundation of philanthropic organizations. You have a very robust economy, so you have a lot of rich people that you can shake down. And honestly, you come back and you also have a good, strong narratives that you can wrap your story around. I mean, you have all these patients out there. I'm a neurologist. That's what I am. I mean, my medical specialty is neurology. And we talked about the neurologic disorders today, the remarkable work being done at the basic level. And I would argue some of the work that we heard about today is at the translational level. So you have it all. You have it all. So now it's creating the narrative around it. One of the narratives, of course, is I'm a soldier. You heard that. The 27 years U.S. Army, 6 deployments, 2 in Iraq, 4 in Afghanistan. And you can wrap your arms around the fact that there is a patient population or populations that you can embrace. When I was on OSTP back in 2013, working for President Obama, I mean, when the Brain Initiative was being launched, and I was at DARPA at the time, and as well as on his staff, the whole notion was, what do you do that's foundational? I mean, it could have been the Alzheimer's project. It could have been the ALS project. It could be cure epilepsy. I can go down this list. But the Brain Initiative was, listen to what John had said, which is he did so eloquently, brain research advanced through innovative neurotechnologies. That's foundational work that underpins Alzheimer's research, epilepsy research, ALS research, and I can go down the list, Parkinson's, right? That was the whole notion of the Brain Initiative. You are foundational. The work you do here is foundational. Rice is storied. I mean, it is, well, Harvard is almost as good as you guys, but not quite, right? So the point is that leverage that. But the one thing, the one piece that should be heralded is what the Provost said. It's the young people. We're losing our young people to hedge funds. We're losing our young people to private equity. This is where we're going. This is terrible. This is terrible. They make nothing. They move money around. They themselves enrich themselves. That's all fine and well. But they actually make nothing, right? I mean, you can deride the pharmaceutical industry, but let's be honest, they make something. You can deride the oil company, but let's be honest, they make something. Hedge funds, they make nothing, right? And so we need our young people to get excited about science. Science is hard. Science is real. Look, getting my PhD was damn difficult. Let me tell you something. It was awful. You know, I mean, all the way up until the day they gave it to me, I wasn't sure they were going to give it to me. It took 5 years. My MD was easy. All I had to do was show up, not kill anybody, not sleep with the dean's wife, and I was good. You know, and I knew which day I was going to graduate with that doggone thing. So getting a PhD is really hard. So making a scientist is difficult. And I'm preaching to the choir because this is what you guys do and you excel at it. But we need to create that group of young people that's going to carry this forward and excite them to the opportunities. And that's all part of this narrative. So the resourcing is not just cash. It's actually the intellectual capital that the Provost talked about, right? It's exciting the American people, such as the Congressman is talking about. You can do that. Rice can do that. Rice has the most optimal ability pulpit ever because you are a storied institution that has a history of doing remarkable things. You don't have to prove to the world how good you are. Everybody knows how good you are, right? So take that and run with it.
Thank you so much, Jeff. I just want to build off of what he just said about the idea of workforce and how that plays into the neuroeconomy in the broader picture, especially since this event is in a university. Since you come from the defense industry as a contractor, I wanted to ask you, what would be your perspective into that whole workforce development and neuroeconomy? And then more importantly, why would you or why shouldn't you pay attention deeper, broader into the world of neuroeconomy?
So I am going to speak from a defense industry perspective because that's what I know best. And what I'm going to say, well, I'm going to give you a little anecdote. I'm a cognitive neuroscientist who up until a few months ago was running a division of electromagnetics engineers. Don't know how that happened, but there I was. And I had a conversation with my senior most engineer, and he said, you know, when I first started in this business 30 years ago, every peer-reviewed journal publication in my field of research was either by the US, and we were advancing the state of the science, or by another country replicating what we had done. That's not true today. So what that told me is we need to be more innovative. So I went on the tour today and went, yay, we're being innovative. What we need in the defense industry to position ourselves to be able to compete on an economic level and on a military level is we need innovation, and we need people who have the capacity to be innovative. And you know, unfortunately, for the last 30 years, the public school system has all been about rote memorization, teach to the test. We have not endorsed critical thinking and innovation as an end goal. But my phone can serve the needs of my memory. Mm-hmm. My phone will not replace the creative ideas that are needed for the future. So as somebody in industry, when I go out looking for new talent, I'm looking for somebody who's not just good at whatever they do, but somebody that's going to be capable of doing something new and different. They're going to be capable of working across disciplines, which I saw today and was thrilled by, and they're going to be capable of taking things further than any of us ever imagined. Because truly, what is going to win the future for us economically and militarily is if we are the most innovative country in the world. And I got to tell you, our peer countries are really doing a good job. So they're setting the bar, and in some places, we're now chasing them. We need to, I think we're actually leading the way in neuroscience. I'm going to be honest. I think we're really delivering here. But across all the science and technology fields, we need to make sure that we're the ones that are setting the standard on a global level for new technology. And I'm looking for the talent to do that.
Thank you. That brings up a question to Greg. I was just going through your programs at DARPA, and I was fascinated by what connects all of these programs together. And I see this usage of the word, and I just want to get it right, addressing the invisible wounds of war. And I thought that was deep and broad. I wanted to see how your programs, or just a high-level remarks about your programs, and how that's affecting, how that's supporting the military.
Well, thank you. So when I was a surgery intern, first day, Madigan Army Medical Center. First thing I remember from my senior surgeon as I was trying to let him create some room to sew up the gallbladder, he said, "Greg, I cannot sew what I cannot see." And I was later teaching ophthalmology residents to do surgery. I would tell them, I cannot sew what I cannot see. And I love so much what the Brain Initiative has done for us as a nation, because it is giving us tools to see in new ways. And if you think of every single scientific advance that has been significant in the history of our world, it is because we can see in new ways. Imagine microbiology or infectious disease without a microscope. Imagine astronomy without a telescope. And what they are building and are continuing to build is the ability to see the brain so we can understand the brain, and I would offer so that we can sew and heal the brain. We've made tremendous progress in aspects in neurology. Parkinson's, some people here can sit in the second row, can put an electrode down in the substantia nigra, and we can cure Parkinson's essentially for patients, right? With our deep brain stimulation. But what we can't do is we can't cure suicidality. What we can't do is we can't cure post-traumatic stress. We can't cure anxiety. We can't cure depression. And you know why that is? It's not for lack of effort. In fact, if you look at the amount the United States spends on mental health, we are at the top of the list of economic developed countries. We are number one. We spend about 5% of our GDP on mental health. We have a $280 million that we spend to address this problem. And yet, we are unfortunately number 15 when it comes to suicide rate. So we are spending the most with the highest suicide rates. That's a problem. And not only are we spending the most, it's the highest rates, but they're actually accelerating, particularly in teens, particularly in active duty soldiers, and in our veterans. So, and I would encourage you, although I don't agree with all of his conclusions, there's a recent article in the New York Times Magazine called a Tragedy of the U.S. Military's Own Making, and it was talked about active duty suicide. And I would argue that it's that particular piece was about the Army caused all this, and certainly there's infrastructure and things we can do better, and a lot of care issues there that can be made. But I would offer the real reason we haven't solved this problem is because we don't know how to do it yet. We don't understand the anatomy and physiology in a way that we can surgically intervene metaphorically. It could be non-invasive, would be great if we can do it that way, or invasively. But until we can fix it like we can fix any other organ, we will not cure mental illness. And again, just to kind of bring this home, 40 years ago I went to medical school, and someone comes in with chest pain, take a history, do a physical, EKG, labs, X-ray, exam, treat. All of that shifted tremendously in the last 40 years. You know what hasn't changed? Somebody comes in and says, I think I want to kill myself. So that's the challenge I would offer to all of you. And in answer to your question, I apologize for maybe getting off on a little bit, but I'm so passionate about how do we heal people as opposed to just, now I don't mean just study their brain. It's obviously critical. We have to build the telescope, but ultimately we have to heal people. So my programs are all designed around how do we understand at the level of the individual, using the best tools that are available, and then how can we mechanistically intervene to engage this process of neuroplasticity? So we know maladaptive neuroplasticity occurs for many reasons. We know positive neuroplasticity occurs for many reasons. My programs are designed to, can we systematically engineer adaptive, persistent neuroplastic changes in the brain that result in an increased subjective experience of our life in a transdiagnostic way. And I would offer the really great opportunity there is if we do that, we're essentially creating the flip side, which is the ability to think creatively, which is the ability to rationally debate and discuss issues, solve problems using our brain so that we can flourish. And frankly, if we can do those two things, then I think we have gone a long ways, not only for our own country, but frankly for the world. So that's what my programs are trying to accomplish.
No, thank you so much. I just wanted to revisit something that Jeff mentioned before, and I would love to get Congressman's thoughts in that area. Because I think whenever we discuss about national security and brain and performance, etc., we tend to focus on the super soldier. But absolutely, the Department of Defense is at the same time focused on buying tanks, ships, airplanes, etc., explosives. But how can we build initiatives that can impact the broader neuroeconomy versus just looking through the window of DoD when DoD is busy in other stuff?
Well, when it comes to national security and our industrial or our military footprint, you need both. You have to have a soldier, sailor, airman, marine, in Space Force. What are the Space Force? Guardians. Thank you. If there's any of you in here, I apologize. But they coalesce very well with our ability to create and weaponize our weapon systems, tanks, ships, bombs, planes, and guns. The tricky part is we're advancing, and she nailed it on the head. We are behind. The actors abroad have advanced so far in hypersonic capabilities and their propulsion systems and their ability to reach out and touch us. And we're trying to catch up. And I hate to say that out loud as a military man, but I'm telling you the truth, we're trying to catch up. Now, we run parallel in certain things, but as we're advancing in our mechanisms, it's the human element that has stayed the same. And certain communities are different. I can say that. I know that certain communities in our military are progressively pushing the limits of a human being daily. And Special Forces community, and I wish I could just start rattling them off to you because some of us under the table, you can't really talk about it. But imagine if we trained our brains as hard as we trained our bodies. What would that look like? Because there's a substantial gap. Remember, you can't take your head off at night and put it on the bedside table. It's connected. And we have lost the ability to train our body and our brain together. Because if the body's broke, it's going to drag the brain down. If the brain's broke, it's going to drive the body down. I've been saying that for years. So in our services, there's a lot of intangibles, but there's certain truths. Number one, it's conflict driven. You most certainly, and as the global threat has started to develop, and I have two sons, and I fight every single day in Washington, D.C. to make sure that I don't have to send them to war, because I went. But as this dynamic has started to expand itself regionally, globally, what is that going to look like? And if we have kind of backed off the throttle, back me nose in the colonel, if we have backed off the throttle and our mental capabilities on the human side, the moment they have to stand up with that rifle in their hand, it'll be completely different, because once a round goes downrange, that's a different statement.
Thank you for your comments.
Can I
Anybody
comment
else?
on that?
Absolutely, yes.
One of the things that we talk, I think probably all of us, but we talk a lot about is brain health. And I think brain health is obviously critical. It's been mentioned here. I think what I'm beginning to see happen in the DoD is a conversation about brain fitness. The idea that you can have a healthy brain but perform at a higher level with training hasn't really been in the DoD conversation until very recently. And so I think I'm not critical of the DoD for that, by the way, because the state of the science hasn't been there till very recently. But we are starting to get further and further down the path of understanding that you can train your brain much like you train your body. You can even augment brain performance much like you can augment your body's performance with certain technologies. And so we are getting to the point where we can change the language so that when we talk about having a fit soldier ready for combat, we understand it as being physically fit and brain fit. And so that's a transition. I think we're just at the beginning of it. As always is the case, the special operations community is the early adopter in this conversation. What they adopt, the rest of the military adopts, and the military is the early adopter for the civilian world. So I think we are at the tip of a trend toward brain fitness becoming a concept that's as ubiquitous as physical fitness.
Anyone else wants to come in?
I would echo all of that, and I would also say the opportunity that we have in the military is, while we should absolutely focus on building the resilient of the most resilient, the most optimized, our SOCOM soldiers, that it is those that are not in those elite units that are also bearing a tremendous amount of trauma and suffering and are less resilient, and provide us with an opportunity to expand that delta. So indeed, at the highest, as the Congressman knows, when you're at the level that he was at and his comrades are at, 0.1% can make the difference between survival or not. There's a large percentage where we could move the mental health and the fitness, the resilience of soldiers from a 20% to an 80%, as opposed to only from a 99 to a 99.99. Both are important. But I think for the broader medical community, it is often, we need to focus on those soldiers as well.
Where you start. So we all talk about the soldier, and the sailor, airman, and Marine. Who actually does that job? I'm looking at this audience and I see a lot of young people, but who actually does that job? Who has actually worn a uniform? Who's actually served in the military? So these are Rice students, these are Rice faculty, but who actually is in the military? Who actually signs up? It's a volunteer army. They come from different backgrounds. They come from different social, economic straits. We talk about, they have a high suicidality, but what do they come in at? Where do they come in? Broken homes, drug abuse, abusive families, right? Because ask yourself, who puts on the uniform? Who do we ask to be a police officer? Who do we ask to be a firefighter? These are all similar types of things. It's very nice to say to the DOD, well, geez, you have this problem, that problem, you have a high suicidality, but who are you giving them to work with? And we owe it to them, honestly, as a society, we ask them to do very difficult things. When they go downrange, they're asked to be a police officer. In the old days in World War II, it's easy to kick down the door and you shoot somebody in it. Now you can't do that. So we only ask them to do a lot of things, and it's a very stressful job and it's a high burden, because if they do something wrong, they will be crucified. Crucified. And yet you took this kid from maybe inner city Baltimore. That's where I am. I live in Baltimore. Coming from inner city Baltimore. And that's what you're asking them to do. So I want to remind everybody that when we talk about the DOD, I want you to keep that in mind, because it is important. The Congressman is absolutely right. The big difference in when you go downrange, and success and failure on the battlefield is not the best gun you have, it's the smartest person you have. That smart person will not do bad things. That smart person will do good things. That smart person will try not to pull the trigger, but if they have to, they will. And the weapon systems they work with are very complicated. They're not all carrying M16s, and that's all they do is point it downrange and just pull the trigger. A lot of them work on very, very complicated systems. You ever sit inside of an M1 Abrams tank and take a look at it? It is not, two levers going like this, So what I'm saying to you is that the DOD actually is a great place to do a lot of the things that you're talking about, because you're talking about people who are not Navy SEALs. They're the best of the best, right? Navy SEALs, Delta, those guys are exceptional, but they're selected. They're selected. They go through a rigorous program. Most people in the military signed up because they had no place else to go. A lot of them were hungry. A lot of them were out of work. They had no place else to go. In fact, I remember when I was at the MEP station coming in the first time, I was the only officer candidate. Only officer candidate. Everybody else, all 300 others, were enlisted, and they had a bus outside that after they made it through the MEPS, the medical screening, they could get on that bus, and they were giving out food vouchers. And you should see how many people ran up to grab that food voucher, because they were going to get a meal that day. So this is what we're talking about. And what I'm suggesting is all the programs that Greg knows exactly what I'm talking about because he was an Army captain also, is that we can use the DoD as an opportunity space because they have a job to do. There are clear metrics. They all take the Armed Forces aptitude test, and you can use a lot of the things you're talking about in the hopes to help them. But we are asking young people to do a job that many of us wouldn't do, but it's a job that we have to do. The world outside is a bad place. You know, I just came back from a briefing from the Ukrainians. You know, they didn't start that fight. It came to them. Now, they could roll over and play dead, but the Ukrainians would be damned if they're going to roll over and play dead. They're going to fight back. They're going to punch back. But, you know, we're very comfortable here. So I agree with Greg. I think that there's a clear and present danger, and we got to be ready for it. Otherwise, we're going to be like the Ukrainians.
You know what the average on a naval aircraft carrier is? Basically a floating city. It's 5,000 folks on this. You know what the average age of the individual that runs that aircraft? 19. 19 years old, runs an aircraft carrier in the high threat area. Then you fast forward the tape and they come out of the military, and where do they go? Suicide rate. The VA stood up their suicide department 3 decades ago, I believe, and the suicide rate has grown every year. Those kids out there are the action arm to fix that problem.
So I just want to open up for, we have 2 minutes, 3 minutes, maybe 1 or 2 questions from the audience, real quick. It has to be real quick.
Hi there. Thank you so much for your panel. It was really interesting. I am the executive director of the Hackett Center for Mental Health, and so that is the work that we do in advanced policy and programs. Part of our work, though, really does focus on early childhood development. And I heard a lot of you guys, and I took some notes, talk about the need for increase of talented youth. Well, talent really, there's overwhelming literature showing that starts in those first couple of years. I think you mentioned how we spend so much more than other countries, but we also invest the least in those early years compared to other countries, and in like maternal policies, social services. So I could go on and on, right? Like innovation, curiosity, right? The brain architecture is so critical to that. So I just love to hear, I think, as a leader of an organization that's trying to advance policy and programs, related to mental health, I have faced challenges in trying to understand in these rooms and trying to get others to understand and buy in that this is a life course issue, and that when we're talking about this, we have to understand that the architecture really does matter. And when we talk about optimization, you're really talking about, fine-tuning later in life, but you have, the opportunity for huge returns early on. So I would just love to hear, thoughts about that intersectionality, whether you've tried to advance that in your organization and also found that it's challenging because people still think of, babies and early childhood as something that just happens in the homes, right, with parents, and they're not understanding that this is actually a crisis in our workforce and in our health system. So
Greg, do you want to?
thank you very much.
Well, I think you've hit on a really key point, and as much as I love the brain and I love everything we've been talking about today, the reality is that we are all bio, psycho, social, cultural, historical beings. And each one of those is important. And to what Jeff said, who we bring people in, how they grow, when they grow, all of that plays a role. And as important as the brain is, and if you look at the national strategy, so that we just, 2024, the Surgeon General just released the national strategy, whole of government effort around prevention of suicide. The majority of that is actually dedicated to upstream efforts. So in other words, what can we do early to prevent? What kind of communities can we build to support? What kind of these other social structures can we put in place that are real and impactful? And I think you're spot on. I think it's absolutely essential.
Thank you. I think we don't have time, right? Okay, so thank you so much for listening to us. Thank you so much to the panel members. Really appreciate your talk. Thank you, sir.
And with that, we will transition to some keynote remarks from Congressman Luttrell. I think he needs no introduction, but point of privilege, he's my congressman, so I'm going to introduce him. I live in his district, by the way. That's what I mean by my congressman. Congressman Luttrell is serving his first term representing Texas' 8th Congressional District, Magnolia, Texas. He serves on the House Armed Services Committee, Committee on Homeland Security, Committee on Veterans Affairs, also co-chair of the Congressional Neuroscience Caucus, bachelor's degree in psychology from Sam Houston State. Shortly after graduation, enlisted in the Navy. I think you might know he's a Navy SEAL. And then Special Warfare Officer, and then has an advanced degree in applied cognition from the University of Texas at Dallas. Congressman?
Thank you, sir.
I took half my talking points. I rattled them off. We were in the panel, so I'll try not to replicate myself. So many challenges, and young lady, your question was spot on, and I digested that as a father. You know, because like you heard myself, I'm trying to navigate those difficult waters with my babies, and I might close. I'm gonna have to catch you after class to kind of. That's one of those. This is going to get personal because I'm trying to figure out the nexus on where the breakdown in our educational systems and how we catch the babies in the trajectory and create the trajectory that we want. Because if you're dealing with what we were talking about today, just in the neuroscience space, very complicated area, right? And the discussions that I've had, not only here, but in Washington, D.C., because it's myself and Mr. Blumenauer. He's absolutely a phenomenal man, and unfortunately, he's leaving me. He's retiring. But he and I speak that language. And it's important, as you know, and all of you in here, you speak a very unique language. But the rest of the folks outside this building don't speak the language that we speak. And it's important to be bilingual, is the best way that I can say that. And in Washington, D.C., my job is to not only to promote, but advance the opportunities for brain health. And speaking with my colleagues, and I speak to all of them, okay, because when we're talking about our livelihood and humanity, there's no lanes. It's very important that everybody understands that. And when I was in grad school learning about the brain, I told my professor, you need to put this in crayon. I'm a military guy. I don't understand what you're saying. And when the legislators will introduce themselves to this area that we operate in, that they can very well get lost. Like they get lost in conversation with me, and I'm trying to explain the importance of the advancements in the brain health community, because it's not that we're not behind in any stretch, but they don't know you. Outside, I don't care if you're talking about the legislators here locally in the state or at the federal level, they don't know you. And everything that we saw today is game changing, because my aggressiveness is I want to touch people. And I don't know if I offend some academics in any way, but I was like, I don't want you to hang anything on the wall anymore. It looks cool, it sounds cool, but I need what you're creating to reach out and touch people, to change the lives of folks. Earlier today, we're talking about deep brain stimulation and how that's making this grand, it's almost like it's like this Poseidon wave that exists that nobody knows about. And it saddens me that, like, I could have a line of veterans around the building lined up, ready to go, but what lives and breathes in between their ability to get what the doctors over there can perform and the surgery is so much bureaucratic red tape. We have created a problem set between our abilities to create and innovate something special and implement that into society. And I get it, we're touching human bodies, and we have to be very careful. Absolutely, I would never walk that back. As a researcher, it is absolute. But I think there's stall points, and that's my job to break that down. It's my job to relieve the pressures where they exist. But I don't know what I don't know. And the conversations are, I need you to tell me that. And I mean, tell me. Don't send me an email. Don't tell somebody to tell me. It's one of those, I'm here for a reason. I've been here all day. I was here previously, and I made it a point to say I'm coming back all day to live here, to make sure that I am highly educated in what I need to share in order to promote the funding lines and everything else in between here and there, okay? Because we have to be able to, academics, we're very siloed. And the fact that we've created these cross-functional teams, we have engineers working with scientists and neurologists, brilliant. I'd like to claim victory on that because I was preaching that when I got out of the military, but since we're doing it, go for it and great things. That is how we will affect this movement that we're making. But we can never slow. And to the Provost's point, if this is a space that has to develop every single second of every minute of every hour of every single day. All right, and the communication flow has to be. We have to break down the silos. We have to sew the seams between we have to thread the seams between the silos so everybody's communicating. Every single lab that has an astounding accomplishment touches another lab in some way. And I want to think, and from what I hear today, I know that here at Rice, in between Baylor and the other partners, that has been broken down and the communication is great. But I'm a UT Dallas grad. Does UT Dallas have any idea what we're doing here? Nobody's saying anything, so that's pretty heartbreaking. But I get it. Keep it close to your chest. I understand. Victory is ours. But there's a lot of people that live between here and there. Okay? Thank you for your time, and I'll keep it short and sweet. There we go. God bless.
Congressman, thank you so much. I want to pause briefly and recognize a few folks who came in as we were getting started. I want to recognize State Representative John Rosenthal. Thank you for joining us. And a good friend of ours and a neighbor, State Representative Suleiman Alani. Thank you for joining us as well. And with that, we're going to transition to our second panel. So if at this time we could, I'd like to invite Eric Mullins, Simon Fisher-Baum, Samir Sheth, Dr. Greg Bonin, and Kelly O'Brien to come to the front. And I'll give a quick introduction for Eric, who will moderate for us. Eric is the 2024 Greater Houston Partnership Board of Directors Chairman, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Lime Rock Resources. Prior to joining Lime Rock, he served as Managing Director of the Investment Banking Division at Goldman Sachs, and he currently serves on the board of Valero Energy Corporation and Baylor College of Medicine Board of Trustees. Eric, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to our panelists, and we look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Nathan. Appreciate that introduction. First of all, I'm excited to be here. We have a terrific panel. Nathan mentioned I'm board chair of the Greater Houston Partnership. What you might not know is the board chair each year has the privilege of picking a theme of which you rally the whole partnership staff around, and they're out there trying to make sure Houston is the best place to live and work and build a business. My theme this year were opportunities for Houston. And I know that's very broad, so I had 3 subpoints. My first subpoint was building a super strong K through 12 education system, which is critically important. Second thing is workforce development, and the third thing was mental health. Now you might think, wow, that mental health, why that? And everything we've talked about today is consistent. It's my hook to being here, being on this panel. More and more mental health is creeping into the work environment, as you all know. And so businesses are having to deal with that. So I'm excited to be here. This is a topic that I'm passionate about. I can't tell you how many people came up after our annual meeting and we talked about this and said, hey, great that you're shining a spotlight on this. Really appreciate it. You're destigmatizing it. You're allowing people to get help. So anyway, that's my intro. I think what I'd like to do to start off is have each one of you briefly give a quick introduction, your background, and also just the link in terms of your work as professionals to our panel topic here today, and then we'll get into some questions. So Kelly, I'll start with you.
Thanks, Gary. You hear me? No. Oh, okay, there it is, the magic microphone. Thank you. And I think it's really interesting that the 3 priorities you choose are all components of what builds a great company, and they're all related from this conversation today, I think, very interrelated. So it's great to be with you. I'm Kelly O'Brien. I work for an organization called Us Against Alzheimer's. And the way that I'm connected to this conversation is this. Us Against Alzheimer's is a national nonprofit advocacy organization that's working to end Alzheimer's. So my background is really primarily, for my entire life, I started off on Capitol Hill as a staffer like when I was, 20. So my whole life has been in politics, policy, public health, and advocacy. And right now I'm working to end Alzheimer's. The way that we do that is through prevention. We don't want people to get it in the first place, early detection and treatment. The work that I do is in prevention. So the way that we've come to be working on brain capital and brain health issues is that I'm trying to work upstream. So in the prevention world, we're working on preventing Alzheimer's from happening in the first place, reducing the risk. And we now know from a lot of the research and science that they may eventually be possible. We know we can reduce the risk, but we can delay onset. And a lot of the things that we can do to prevent it are things that we need to do to be healthy as we age. So addressing hypertension, physical inactivity, poor nutrition, good sleep, depression, anxiety, alcohol overuse. I could go on and on. A lot of the risk factors, diabetes, obesity, the things that we're talking about to live long, healthy lives have an impact on whether or not we develop dementia or not. And up to 50% of cases of dementia we think can be prevented by addressing some of these upstream factors. So there are things that we can do now. And when you look at when those things happen, when they develop, it's a life course thing, as we were talking about earlier. It starts at birth, right? It starts early. But a lot of these really important risk factors develop and stick in midlife. And guess where people are at midlife? They're working. And that's the ecosystem that we're in midlife. We're at work, we're in community. So we've placed a bet that in addition to working in the healthcare system with clinicians to help educate them about the kinds of conversations they can be having about brain health, that we want to be working with employers. And we think it's really important for the business community to understand that this is a really important ecosystem in which humans are developing and have an opportunity to prevent further brain health conditions, including mental health, but also neurodegenerative conditions as they age. So it's been a really interesting conversation that we've been having with the business community. We recently developed a business collaborative for brain health, which I'll talk a little bit about more, and the value proposition for that. The interesting thing, as we've heard today, is that it's not a one-way street. It's not as if we're asking companies to do something to help the health of their employees. But as we've heard from the conversations from the military and in education, that has payoffs for business. That in order to build a great business, innovation, creativity, analytical thinking, focus, all these things we're talking about, you have to support brain health. And so we think this is a value proposition that it goes both ways. And so it's been a really interesting endeavor that we've embarked on. So,
Simon?
Awesome. Hi, I'm Simon Fisherbaum. I'm an associate professor here at Rice in the Psychological Sciences Department. I'm also seconded at the moment to the National Science Foundation, where I run a program on cognition and work on a variety of things on neuroscience. But the same as the DoD statement, I'm representing my own views only in this meeting. So I'm gonna, those things sort of come together with how I see myself fitting into this conversation. So like many scientists, I started my career with kind of like starting from Aristotle. People have wondered about X, but I'm going to solve it in my lifetime, some deep philosophical question about the brain. And as time has gone on, I've gotten very bored with that perspective. And I think we have this enormous number of very excited scientists here, young people here. I heard it from all of my Rice students that they don't just want to answer really deep questions. They want to help people. They want to figure out ways to do things, to use their knowledge, to use their skills to try to improve the world. And so I started to transition my lab into thinking about how I could use the things that I know about to address some real problems. And since I am one scientist and run a fairly small lab, I focus on a fairly constrained problem, which is the problem of Braille literacy. So I'm a scientist, I'm a cognitive neuroscientist of reading and writing. There's a lot of people who study how reading and writing works in people who are sighted, and there's actually been really amazing transitions from research to policy in recent years around taking the cognitive science and neuroscience of reading and turning it into statewide policies about literacy. not without controversy, but it has existed as a transition point. But not everybody reads by sight, and there's huge problems with literacy among people who are blind, and there wasn't the same kind of empirical basis for thinking about what does it mean to know how you're blind. And so I didn't want to do it myself. I found people who actually knew about how teachers were trained to teach people with visual impairments. I worked with scientists who were blind, who had lived experience with what it means to read by touch. And we started a project, and it's been going really well. And it feels like we're making progress, except that we run into these problems of how do we actually implement our change, right? How do we actually go from knowing what we think should happen to actually getting, say, individual school districts to adopt policies that would be the right kind of policy to affect that change? And the answer is that, to go back to what Kuyanta said, is these interventions in early life seem to be probably the most cost-effective ways to improve brain capital, but we need to figure out how to state the value proposition. I'm not an economist, and it's now clear to me that I need to hang out with more economists who really know what that phrase means. I said it because it sounded good, but I'm not 100% sure how to actually calculate it. But how do you actually do that? And so how do you say that it's really important for us to invest in students who are blind or visually impaired to really learn how to read Braille, which is like allows them to read in their own voice, in their own way, to be independent, to actually engage in the workforce? How do we actually communicate that value proposition in a way that it makes sense to spend the money that needs to be spent to provide those services? And so notions like brain capital become ways that you can sort of think about how to do that calculation in a way that that calculation hasn't necessarily been done previously. And so then, the time at the NSF has involved thinking really broadly about how science plays out and how siloed we are, in fact, as scientific communities, and how we can bridge across those silos. And I see this small thing that I've experienced as a researcher play out on lots of different scales across sort of the ways that we think about how neuroscience can actually be used to impact society, right? So the impact of neuroscience and brains on society isn't necessarily through intervening in brains, but it can be all sorts of ways that we take things that we know about because we know about brains and come up with other ways to intervene that might be more cost effective and scalable in all sorts of ways. And I think this provides a framework for being able to think about how we might be able to do that.
Great.
Thanks for having me. My name is Samir Sheth. I'm a neurosurgeon across the street at Baylor College of Medicine, and have somehow conned Rice into giving me a joint appointment here in electrical computer engineering and the neuroengineering initiative. My specialty in neurosurgery is functional neurosurgery, and these are disorders of circuits in the brain. These circuitopathies are among the disorders that strike the very core of our humanity. We talked about Parkinson's, we talked about epilepsy, we talked about depression and PTSD and OCD and addictive disorders. These are really where I spend a lot of time studying the brain and trying to heal these dysfunctional circuits. My undergraduate major was in astrophysics, and what drew me to that was the unfathomable complexity of deep space that we'll never fully be able to understand or explore, but we'll spend all of humanity trying to. Long story short, I came into medicine and then really focused on neurosurgery, and in particular in functional neurosurgery, because this is the cosmos that is here in front of us. It's this 10-pound gelatinous ball of flesh between our ears. It is at least as complex, if not more, and we will spend our entire lifetime as a species trying to understand it. Maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't fully understand it. Don't know, but we're going to keep trying. These disorders that face us today that we're talking about live in the evolutionarily most advanced part of the brain, which is in the frontal and prefrontal regions. And this is where mental health disorders give birth. This is where they arise from, and this is where I think we have to bring all of this person power that we've talked about here to understand and to heal these circuits. I'm excited for the discussion. Thanks for having me.
All right. My name is Greg Bonin, and I'm actually a neurosurgeon as well. And this is really strange because within the world of neurosurgery, functional neurosurgery is actually a pretty small subset. And I can't remember the last time I sat next to another functional neurosurgeon, but here we are. I started doing surgery for movement disorders back in 1995. I started when I was 5 years old, which is just a joke. And I didn't know what I was going to the young people. I didn't have any clue what I was going to do when I went to college or medical school. I could only figure it out through experience. I actually finished med school and matched into orthopedic surgery, and I learned that orthopedic surgeons are 1/3 caveman. We used to say their operative reports were BBMF, bone broke me fix. They're about 1/3 cowboy, and the truth is, to do it Dr. Sheth and I do, you can't be normal. You have to have a little bit of cowboy in you. And they're about 1/3 frat boy. And so the cowboy part worked, but the caveman frat boy part didn't. And I can say that with affection because to this day, most of my closest friends who are physicians are actually orthopedic surgeons. But I ended up not only in neurosurgery, but doing movement disorders as well. And we have the coolest toys, for sure. And I want to go back to something that was said earlier. Dr. Sheth, of course, is doing a lot of research. He's on an academic bent. Clinically, though, if we're humble and honest about it, we kind of play hero ball. In other words, we come in and we try to fix things when things are not going well. And it's very rewarding. You get a lot of instant gratification. I actually had a patient and, his wife, cry yesterday. They were so overwhelmed with the change that they had seen. But gosh, it's so much better if you can prevent them from ever being in that position in the first place. So you're absolutely right. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. But I think the real reason I'm here is because I'm a member of the Texas House of Representatives, along with John Rosenthal and Dr. Lalani, who are with us. I also happen to be the chair of the Budget Committee, and I think some people in this room might be interested in money. I don't know. I just kind of get that impression. And so there is, an intersection here of those interests. And over the last few years, we've actually done some really great work in Texas. I'm not going to unpack all of that, but when it comes to national security, when it comes to human capital, and you look at some of the things that we have done in community colleges and higher education, with creating a strategic plan for the space economy. It's the ultimate high ground from a national security perspective, and also with semiconductors. And I want to reference something Congressman Luttrell mentioned when he said, is UT Dallas aware of what's happening down here? That's part of why we did that. It wasn't just to provide funding. It was to get the best minds in the state of Texas in the same room and to cross-pollinate. And as I've said many times to a lot of different stakeholder groups, if you come, the quality of your funding will be directly proportional to the quality of your plan. That's number one. Number two is, if you come with an ask that's specific to your program or your school, it's not going to be as compelling. But if you come and you say, hey, all around the state, as stakeholders, we have come together and here's a strategic plan that we're going to make life better for the people of the state of Texas and therefore better for the people of this country by doing this, that's compelling. And so Congressman Luttrell is dead on. And some of the most exciting things that we've seen with respect to space exploration and development in this last year have in part been from some of the conversations that would have never taken place. But we got these people finally working together.
That is great. Appreciate those intros. Can't wait to get in some of these questions. Simon, let me start with you. What kind of science do we need to support this brain economy transition that we're trying to execute on? And in particular, what I'm really trying to say is, how can neuroscience influence the education policy and practice?
Yeah, so I have been thinking about this a lot. I think that's a great question. So, in the last panel, there was a discussion of sort of a transition from thinking about brain health to brain fitness, which I think is a really important and exciting transition to be making, right? So a brain health perspective is to say somebody has a clinical condition that is going to, kill them or hurt their quality of life, and we need to find them when they're having that condition, and we need to intervene on them so that they no longer have that clinical condition, right? And so sometimes that means that they reach some level that they're not going to come to the clinic anymore and not going to be bothering our medical system anymore. That's a oversimplified way of putting it. Brain fitness is a lot vaguer, right? So it's now you take somebody where they are and you figure out how can we get them to be better or to be the best, sort of the best at where they could be, and what are the things for that person. And so some of it is that we maybe are focusing on different kinds of science than what we've largely focused on, right? So creativity came up as a topic last time. There's some neuroscience of creativity, but there's way less neuroscience of creativity than there is of movement, because we have a lot of clinical disorders of movement. And so we have ways to try to treat those clinical disorders of movements. We don't have clinical disorders of creativity. And so we haven't really thought about what it would mean to kind of treat that. But if we want to sort of get brain fitness or brain flourishing, getting people to be more creative and more innovative is probably something that we would want to accomplish. And we need a science to understand what those constructs actually mean. And then the other thing is when we think about brain fitness, we think about people as they are, which is pretty varied, right? There's lots of different factors in people's lives that make human individuals really different from each other. And so there's differences that have to do with culture, there's differences that have to do with experience, there's differences that have to do with education and what's going on in your household, with linguistic experience, with all sorts of different things. And if we want to think about brain fitness, we have to do a better job of thinking about the diversity of the human experience and build a neuroscience of diversity, and just so that we can figure out how to get everybody based on where they are to where they could be, as opposed to thinking about what is normal and how can we get people so that they're now normal again so that we don't have to have them be in a clinical setting. So I think this move to brain fitness is a really incredible and important transition. And I think there is some science that's there that supports it, but I actually think if we take this transition really seriously, there will be a refocusing of what neuroscientists are trying to make sense of and where our efforts are going in neuroscience to try to do the actual research that will support this transition that the DoD already really has put in place. That's really happening.
Great. Did you have a thought, Dr. Sheth?
Plenty of thoughts. Is it my turn?
I'll
wait.
Sure. No, you can add
Okay,
whatever you like.
Well, I think I'll echo everything that Simon said. I think the opportunity that we have here, I think, in particular here physically, geographically, that we don't, I think, in many other parts, or maybe any other part of the country, is to actually be able to work literally across Main Street from each other to realize these changes, to take the science and the engineering that is the life's blood of this university campus and marry it with the translational potential that we have on the other side of the street, the biggest medical center in the world, paired with the one of the best, science and technology universities, in the country or world. Where else, should this happen than here? If the first panel was a bit about, defining the problem, maybe this one is about, also talking about, solutions. Dr. Bonin talked about, a patient yesterday who got emotional. Just this morning with the representative, with Dr. Nye, we heard, from one of our patients whose life of OCD was completely turned around. She's now about to be a mother, adopting 3 children and living the life that she wants to live. These are anecdotes, and so that's the criticism, okay? So, there's maybe scores of patients like her, not millions. These are anecdotes, but the fact that we can do it for 1 or 2 people means we should be able to do it for everybody. All we need is that know-how, the science of being able to understand what these circuits are and how to restore them to health. The tools are here; they're available to us. If we can do it once, we can do it again and again and again. I think that within my lifetime, and Dr. Bonin shared with us, he's in his 30s, and so I'm in my 20s. The hairline I blame on my parents, but and so we have some time, and I really think that we are not that far away from being able to translate all these discoveries into therapies that are not just effective, but also palatable and accessible and generalizable and scalable to the population that needs it.
That's great. By the way, Dr. Sheth, what is a hairline? So Greg, let me go to you next. And first of all, you are a unique person, a neuroscientist that is in politics. You're a rare breed. But if you could maybe spend a minute telling us the importance, really, of this brain economy transition we're talking about as it relates to the mental health across the communities across Texas.
Yeah, well, look, mental health is an area that's gotten a lot of attention, as it justly should. And there's no question that it is interwoven inextricably with brain health. And we've made a big commitment in this state to advancing mental health through a whole variety of programs and funding. I do want to quickly go back to what we were just talking about with Dr. Seth and maybe even challenge you guys. So Texas A&M has an NMed program. You may or may not be familiar with it. These students enroll in medical school and they are engineering students, and they end up with a patent before they actually graduate with their MD degree. That sounds like something that Baylor and Rice might be able to partner on as well. When we were rolling out the Space Commission, the governor spontaneously said, I'm going to challenge the public universities in this state to create a space engineering major, and within months, that's actually already happening. And that's part of how you're going to bring that intersection together. But to get back to your question and to also the issue that was raised earlier, and this is something I'm just going to throw out now instead of in a few minutes, and that is, it's amazing what guys like Dr. Sheth and I get to do. But if we're honest about it, when you think about mental health, there are some very basic things that in our society are lacking. And the first one would be not that glamorous, but it's simply nutrition. It's what we eat. And, I think my generation or the generations to come are going to look back at sugar the way my generation looks at cigarettes, okay? And then the generation after that is going to look at smartphones and screen time the way they look at sugar. And I'll speak a little bit more to that, but if you want to talk about brain health, and especially in young people, when their brains are still experiencing a lot of plasticity and a lot of growth, and those circuits are still forming and the connections haven't yet been reinforced, what happens based on nutrition, what happens based on their interpersonal interactions is critical. But even as we get older, it still matters. So obesity, hypertension, diabetes, microvascular disease, this definitely affects brain health. It affects mental acuity and performance. And on a volume level, it's probably more impactful than Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. And there's probably a nexus between those things, okay? And I think there's some opportunities for us from a public policy standpoint that I'll lay out in a few minutes to maybe not so much address that, although we can. But what is happening to young people over the last decade due to the development of the smartphone and their access to that and social media and the targeted advertising that it is occurring, it is creating a whole generation of kids that are anxious, that don't know how to interact in a healthy way with people around them. And that has got to be in our top two, in my opinion, if you want to really change mental health and brain health in our country.
Not just kids, adults.
Well, and so...
Look on Nextdoor any day.
Well, so I will tell you, I love my smartphone, okay? But I'm not active on social media. I pay somebody to kind of help me with that. I actually didn't have my Facebook password for 10 months as a politician, if you can believe that. I couldn't even log on to see what was going on. But several weeks ago, I was getting so many text messages and phone calls, and I'm still operating, that I could feel the anxiety. And I literally started to keep my phone on silent and just leave it in my office because I could not focus long enough to do the work that I needed to do and then come back and get to those. And that's not even X or Instagram, or that's just people wanting to communicate with me. So 100% it's affecting adults. And thank you for pointing that out, because I don't want to imply it's only young people. It is all of us, and it is insidious. You walk down the hall outside of the PT clinic earlier today, 3 adults sitting in a row, every single one of them. You know what they're doing? They're doing this. So I'll stop there, but I think that we can talk about the really exciting things that some of us get to do that are cutting edge and really can change people's lives, but we can't forget the basic blocking and tackling, because that is foundational.
Excellent. Well, just a quick follow-up, though. From your seat as a representative, what is Texas's role in kind of this future neuroscience path that we're on?
Okay, well, you're going to preempt my whole 10-minute talk at the end when I lay out
just give us a little piece. 3
or 4. Well, I'll just tell you right now, and I can expand on them later. So before this ever coming up, Texas is actually, as I understand it, the second leading funder of cancer research in the United States. Number 1 is the NIH, not shockingly. The reason for that is something called CPRIT, the Cancer Prevention Research Institute of Texas. It's been funded 2 times now with $3 billion over a 10-year window of time. And those $3 billion of bonds, and when you're fighting cancer, you can get people to vote for that, although it was actually hard to create CPRIT, believe it or not. That was not the easiest lift. And a dear friend and somebody I would consider to be belonging in the Texas Legislative Hall of Fame, Senator Jane Nelson, who's now our Secretary of State in Texas, she carried that across the finish line. But it's been hugely successful. So what has been discussed and not gotten across the finish line recently was an analogous effort for neurosciences. And I think to get more, and I can get more detailed, but I think there's a path forward for that. It probably isn't going to be debt funded. I prefer something more along the lines of an endowment that would yield a perpetual return, and then a competitive process like CPRIT, where we provide this steady stream of funding, and it can go to research, it can go to prevention initiatives, it can be used to recruit world-leading researchers to this state. But again, it's merit-based and competitive, and folks in the state of Texas, like the people in this room, compete for access to that resource. And there are a couple other things I'll mention in a few minutes.
All right, that's great. Appreciate that. Kelly, let me come to you. You named your organization the Business Collaborative of Brain Health, not mental health. Tell us how you think about that. What's the difference?
Yeah, thanks. I'll give you 2 reasons for it. One is an advocacy political reason, which is big tent is much more powerful. So better to have all people in the tent, and brain health is a broader concept that I think brings together, just like the Brain Initiative, the graphic on the slide where the brain is at the center, and then you have the National Institutes of Mental Health, and you have National Institutes of Aging, and all of these things come together in the brain. And so number 1 is just it's a more powerful movement, I think. But number 2, I'll tell you a personal story. So I was diagnosed with epilepsy when I was in 1st grade by a teacher. And I subsequently, later in my grade school years, had some learning disabilities that came up, and they didn't really know what they were at the time. And then, life goes on, and I kind of grew out of the epilepsy, but later grew into some mental health issues. I've been really quite through the DSM, so I won't go into great detail, but let's say a lot. I've developed addiction issues, and I'm now in long-term recovery. And then recently, my father died from Alzheimer's. And so when I think about the brain, when I think about those things, I don't think about them, I think about them as a person, as me, right? Like, I'm Kelly, and I have a brain, and my brain does all of these things. I'm not a clinical disease. I'm not mental health Kelly. I'm not addiction Kelly. I'm not Alzheimer's Kelly. And I think the medical system and the way that we talk about these things makes things about illnesses and disease and not about people. And it's kind of the same way if you think about it like your heart. We think about heart health, right? And we don't say like, is it your left ventricle? I have a left ventricle problem, or I have this problem. We talk about heart health, you know? And if I could merge heart health and brain health, I would do it and make even a better word, because I think they're so interconnected. So for us and for me, I think it's really about like, this is about the brain, and there's a lot of things that intersect and interrelate, and we don't even know all of those things, but it doesn't certainly help us to bifurcate them anymore. I also think it really does help with this other conversation about brain fitness. I'm also an athlete, and I'll tell you, in addition to special forces in the military, athletes know how to do this, because we don't look at performance, we don't look at mental health or physical performance as a deficit. We look at it as an opportunity. Right? Like, so we are looking to improve our performance. And I'm not looking at things and saying, okay, you only got this, you're only a 10-minute miler. I'm like, okay, how do I get from the 10-minute mile to a 9-minute mile? Like, that's the way we approach it. How do we get improvement? How do we get fitness? If you go to Cubs training camp, which I've been to, they have mental health supports for the Cubs. They actually do meditation, and they talk about it as performance, right? They want the players to have the best cognitive performance on the game. And I talked to the psychologist that works with the players, and you know what he said to me was that it's a good secret way into good mental health discussions, because when the guys come in and they want to get better at the game, they will often talk to you about things that are going on in their lives, right? And then there's a doorway that opens into a different conversation that you can solve. I think the same thing is true of brain health. There's a way to have this conversation that's about performance, for example, on the job, right? About building creativity, about building memory and brain skills that doesn't infer that someone is somehow inferior or has a problem. And one last thing on this, whereas dementia is concerned, we have a huge problem with people not wanting to get screened for dementia. Why? Because they think if they go in for a screening, it means somebody thinks they have Alzheimer's, and they're terrified. Why? Why won't we just the same way we do other things? When you get a blood pressure, when you get your blood pressure cuff, you don't go, oh my God, my doctor thinks I have heart disease. You just think, all right, what is it? You know what I mean? And like, do I need to do better? What else do we need to do? We need to be thinking about our brains like that. We need to have a cognitive baseline, and we need to be looking at it regularly, and we need to be thinking about how we optimize for that and mitigate any risk factors or conditions that could make that worse. And those things are, like we've talked about, very interrelated. So that's why we call it the brain health. We think it's much more palatable, much less stigmatizing, much more optimistic, and has an opportunity to build in the brain skills and brain performance conversation that mental health has a little bit more of a challenge to do.
Just a quick follow-up, you mentioned earlier the workplace. Yeah. And if you could relate kind of what we're talking about as relates to how important the workplace is for this brain health, that would be great.
Yeah, well, one of the speakers, now I can't remember, it was John, who said our brains are our greatest asset. So if you think about the business ledgers, assets and expense, right? If you look at what businesses are running on these days, in the old days it used to be the asset ledger of businesses was mostly equipment, it was things, right? It was inventory. Now it's people. It's intellectual property, right? It's marketing, right? It's AI, right? It's not a thing. It's not a hard thing. It's 90% people. And yet people are on the expense ledger of a company. And what we're trying to do is say, like, if our brains are our greatest asset, if your people are your greatest asset, you need to start investing in your people. Because the companies that invest in people and invest in building cognitive resilience, cognitive skills, and cognitive health are going to be the ones that outperform the others. You can't have AI without HI, human intelligence, right? You can't have environmental sustainability without human sustainability. Who's running all this stuff? Who's going to look at all this AI? Like, we have to have that analytical capability to make those decisions, or guess who's going to win? So I think that we're trying to have a different conversation about, this is not a human resources expense that, well, if you do well enough this year, you might have enough money to give your employees more benefits. No, it's a structural conversation at the CEO's office in the boardroom about how do we build the brain capital of our humans at this company so that we can outperform the others. And that we also, along the way, build the brain health and resilience of our people. For us, we feel like if we can build that value proposition, then it's a win-win, because upstream people are going to do better. They're going to do better in the present, but they're also going to do better in the future. Like your 401k, right? You build, it compounds, you get healthier aging, except you get to make withdrawals daily. You know, you get daily wins, just like with exercise.
Let me extend that to you, Simon. How can neuroscience, what can it teach us about a healthy work environment and helping people in particular not experience this burnout factor that we see all the time?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Sorry, the delay gets me every time. So I'm going to talk of my department here at Rice, which is a little self-serving, but I'm going to do it anyway. So one of the things that's really exciting about our department at Rice is we have this expertise in neuroscience, but we also have really a strong group in industrial organizational psychology. Actually, the strongest. Actually, it's the best in the whole country. So we've been thinking a lot about how neuroscience, most neuroscience happens in labs. It happens in careful settings where we study people who are doing really simple tasks in machines that are loud and claustrophobic and take a long time to set up, or various things like that. But actually, we want to understand people in the real world. And right, so I think there, again, another kind of new science that we can be thinking about how to build is the science, neuroscience at work, which I think we have the pieces. Lots of places maybe have the pieces. At Rice, we really do have the pieces to be able to put together something that would be able to push us forward to be able to solve those problems. We're studying humans as they exist in the actual context of their lives, as opposed to humans as they exist in the context of tiny experiments that we have designed to run on them. And I think the workplace is a really good place to do that, because in fact, it's where most people spend most of their time. I think sleeping is another place to do that, because it's another place that people spend a lot of their time, and it's worth looking at. I think education settings are another place to do that, because it's where our children spend a lot of their time. And so the more that we can start to build science towards studying people as they are in the environments that they actually exist in, the closer we're going to be able to get to have neuroscience be really helpful to be able to solve a bunch of these problems.
Okay, thank you. I want to shift gears here a little bit, and Dr. Sheth, I read about some of the work that you're doing in particular. Tell us about how you see the advanced brain-computer interfaces or neurotechnology being used to address some of the brain disease that you work on.
Yeah, thanks. I think we can very easily tie it actually to the conversation that just happened. What Kelly and Simon just said, which is bringing the neurotechnology to the lived lives of individuals. So, just like it's not addiction Kelly and it's not Alzheimer's Kelly. It's not our patient this morning. It's not OCD Katie and mother Katie. It's Katie as a woman living her life. And I think one of the really exciting things that we're going to be seeing, and John talked about this in his talk about research that's being funded. What do we need to know? How can we learn about the relationship between what our brain is doing and how we're actually behaving and functioning in real life? Not in a noisy, expensive claustrophobic machine. Not even necessarily, sitting at a computer playing a game designed to explicitly separate this type of decision making from that. Those are all really important, of course. But let's also think about how we live our lives. How do we interact with people? How often do we leave the house to go shopping or go to the gym or go to the work, versus how often are we stuck in our room with the lights off because we're depressed or because we just had an OCD flare-up or because the PTSD is really acting up. We can study these things because now people love to wear devices, and count their steps, and see their. I wore the Oura Ring for like a couple of weeks, and I was all about my sleep efficiency, and then I realized that too much efficiency is actually bad because it means I'm too tired. But people love to wear these things and know all these things about themselves. And now let's pair that, and this is what one of our young faculty, Nicole, is doing, is really preparing the information that we can get from these things that we love to wear and we love to know about ourselves with the recordings that we can get from, for example, implanted DBS systems that can also record neural data. And again, these are small, numbers of people who can do this, but as these implanted devices become more common, we can really, enter the world of behavioral neuroscience in the wild. And understand what the relationship is between the circuitry going on in this little 10-pound ball of flesh and how we live our lives and how we interact with people and how we socialize and how we move about the world. I think this is really exciting, and I think a lot of this work is actually in partnership with a lot of people here in ECE at Rice, in the NEI, in computer science, in psychology. Again, another example, of across Main Street really being able to get, health and science together. And I think this is what really matters, right? It doesn't really matter how you perform in this behavioral task. What matters is, can you do the things you want to in life? Can you socialize? Can you have a job? Can you have a family? Can you interact? And do you sleep well? And do you are you performing? Is your activity level what you want it to be? And these are the things that we can really understand the neural basis of with this, I think, new form of neuroscience in the wild, which is enabled by these types of neurotechnologies that interface with the brain and the outside world.
Great, thank you. So Dr. Bonin, I've heard about this new Texas Government Neuroscience Fund. Can you tell the audience a little bit about it, and how realistic is it? How close are we? What has to happen in order to push that forward?
I don't know. So I contemplated whether it was smart to even talk about it, because I saw somebody who I respect tremendously and is very wise and experienced, and this individual was being asked about a foreign policy issue. It was a former national leader, and his response was, I think we'd be a lot better off if our government did less talking and took more action. And sometimes it's good to talk about these things, and sometimes we have to plant the seed and do a lot of foundational or background work and then get it across the finish line. You'll not be shocked to learn politics is going to, enter into this, and sometimes in the legislative process, things that have nothing to do with what you're working on can come into play. And so I think we have a good opportunity, but I don't want to get too far ahead of myself right now, other than to say I'm going to be personally investing some time and energy into seeing if we can get that done, which you guys would have no reason to know this. The legislature in Texas is a citizen legislature. We get paid $600 a month. That's why Dr. Leilani leaves his practice to go do that. It's for that $600. And we meet for 140 days every other year. So in a 24-month cycle, we meet for 5 months. And that session, that cycle will begin in January and it'll run through May. So the things that I'll mention that we're going to take up, we'll say go second Tuesday in January, and we will be done by the end of May. I've found that actually works really well. Believe it or not, I wouldn't change the way we do that for a few reasons. One, you have to really want to be there, okay? Nobody is earning a living serving in the Texas House or in the Texas Senate. Two, we really have seasons. So the idea that we were only working for 5 months every other year, that's inaccurate. Every single day I'm working on legislative business, and yet I'm not under the pressure of casting votes and having committee hearings every day and doing these sorts of things. So it creates an opportunity to do a deep dive and to really think about, hey, what we did last time, how's it being implemented? Is it being implemented? Are they messing it up? Is it working the way it's supposed to? And what do we need to do next time? And what are the new opportunities that we have? That's a healthy season to have. The other aspect of this I would point out is human nature. You could give us all of next year to work on legislation, and until we have deadlines, we won't make decisions. And so you can talk about it as long as you like, but until everybody is forced to vote yes or no and put their cards on the table, you're not going to get decisions. So we get done in 5 months more than most states, or no offense, the federal government can get done in years, okay? It's really pretty phenomenal. We fly much under the radar, okay? But that is kind of the cadence or the structure of your state government. And we do have an opportunity next spring to get a lot of really great things done for the people of the state. And I'm very optimistic about that, including an initiative in neuroscience, because it would meet the criteria that I laid out for you earlier. It's not about one school. It's not about one program. it's about the best minds and the best ideas and the best proposals that get funded. And I'd like to structure it in a way that it goes on, indefinitely, and perhaps has an opportunity to grow over time. Because if it's static, then just due to inflation, obviously, its purchasing power would erode. But we have a pretty good track record in the state of doing that. That's why we have our Tier 1 public institutions. We created a new higher education endowment just last session. And so I don't see why we can't take that strategic approach to neuroscience research.
Great. Appreciate that. There's one question I've been dying to ask. Kelly mentioned it earlier in terms of AI. And Simon, you might, anybody can answer, but I want to start with Simon. And just talk about the relationship between how the human brain works and these AI systems.
Should I turn on my lecturing voice and try to do it as a class? I teach a class at that at Rice, or I used to. I think that's a great question. And so I think there is a relationship. There is a historic relationship about where these frameworks came from, that come from a massive simplification of how the brain works. And there was an incredible marketing decision to call it artificial intelligence, which has been really fantastic for it as an industry. So one connection is that there is an inspiration. There is there is an inspiration that the more molecular neuroscience you get, the less you see the inspiration between how brains learn and how humans learn for these systems. I think the bigger question right now is how we think about the performance of these systems and how humans work with them. So I study language, and so I think a lot about the large language models that have come out in the past year and how we make sense of what they are and how to use them, right? So there are big problems with them in terms of them not always saying things that are true. They don't know how to count. There's lots of issues with what these large language models are capable of doing. And from somebody who sort of studies how they learn and thinks about the nature of what they've been given, none of those problems are a surprise. But from the way that we want to interact with these systems that we think are intelligent systems, we want them to behave like humans. And there's still a pretty big mismatch between what these systems are capable of doing and how they work and how humans work. But they raise all sorts of very interesting questions about how humans actually work. And so if we're gonna work with these systems, we have to understand them and we have to understand ourselves better. And so it raises new kinds of questions about human intelligence. The other thing is the brain is the most powerful computer in the world. And it runs on, I wish I knew by heart, it runs on 100 volts? Less than that. 15 watts. Yeah, sorry, 15 watts. Yeah, it's like a super dim bulb. Artificial intelligence systems are a little bit more energy ineffective than that. And so there is a real need for trying to understand how the human brain is able to have the computational capacity that it has at such energy efficient levels. If we're going to depend more and more on artificial intelligence, we also understand that we're using a lot of energy, that maybe we need to be using less energy, then it seems like it would be really helpful to figure out how to get these systems to be as energy efficient as the brain. And so that's another area that I think is a really interesting place to see a connection between these things.
Very good. Thank you. So I want to make sure I leave a little bit of time in case there are questions from the audience. Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. I'm also a member of the NIH. And so we have been talking about the importance of developing brain capital early on and brain fitness. And having heard about the powerful effects of the arts, music, and dance on brain health and fitness, right? Mm-hmm. And we need metrics, we need the rubrics, right? And I will, encourage you to work on that. I'm actually, collaborating with Tony Brown here at Rice. I develop brain computer interfaces, and we can show them in real time for kids, right? So we control visual projection using interbrain synchrony between dancers, right? From the outside, so you can see how your brain modulates as you're interacting. You can take this to school. You can take this to one of the United Nations in May, showing this, right? That is AI for good, right? This is AI used for the good purpose of training and learning about the brain. So I would like to see more of that.
Yeah, so I agree. I mean, I think as we think about interventions, right, if we think about intervention is such a funny word when we talk about fitness, I'm not sure it's the right one, but when we think about what are the cheap ways that we could be investing in brain fitness, it's likely going to be through a lot of unexpected avenues. So there's a lot of work on brain training. And one of the saddest applications I've ever seen of applied psychology was hearing about inner city kids in Chicago who weren't going out to recess so they could play working memory training games on their iPads. And it seemed like nature, play, those are probably actually way better ways of like improving the brain capital or whatever we want to call it of these children, as opposed to playing working memory training games. Arts, music, creative expression, those are all things that we can do to help, brain health, mental health, all sorts of things. And they're going to be cheaper investments in some ways, and so they're going to pay off more. And so I think we do have to think really broadly about what are the set of interventions that we think are going to be the ways to improve brain capital the most.
I just have to comment because if anybody is dealing with someone or living with someone who has dementia, you know that is an incredible, moving and joyful way to communicate with someone. Typically people do remember and you can sing. And so anyway, I think it's really important. It's scientific, but it's just meaningful, right? So.
Great. Yes.
Thank you. I'm Jochen Reiser. I'm the president and CEO of UTMB, and I'm a nephrologist. So the kidney goes in the cortex. Right? But today I was so blown away by this great discussion today about brain health science. And also I'm very active in my field in nephrology research. But one thing that strikes me is, and one of the reasons I came to Texas is because it's the third coast when it comes to innovation, right? We have Cambridge, Kendall Square for biotech. We have Silicon Valley for computers. And here we are an incredible wealth of knowledge, community, politics, capital. And I think that Texas is at the right time and juncture, especially with this legislator and all these experts to move us up. And I think the HRIs need to be a real driver in bringing the community together, bring the academic institutions together, engage with community physicians and the industry and capital to really create the real third coast in Texas around brain health. Because you know what? We're going to look back in a few hundred years at this time we're all in right now, and it is just like the industry revolution, it's the technology revolution. We're right in there, and we can get this done probably better than anywhere else right here in Texas, but it has to mean that we come together in truly novel ways and reach out across the aisle beyond our own institution and really form partnerships together.
Great. Thank you for that. Are we good?
I think we're good.
Okay. I want to thank all of our panelists. Thank you very much. Great job. Enjoyed it.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you to our tremendous panelists. With that, we'll give the floor to Dr. Bonin. I won't draw out an introduction. He's already introduced himself quite well. Dr. Bonin, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think I'm the only thing between you guys and the reception, so we won't.
And there's Chick-fil-A.
They're even better. So I just want to go over real quick a few things that have already been mentioned. I think that to get back to basics, it's really important to consider the impact of, for example, nutrition on what happens to our brains. Obesity, diabetes, hypertension, these are problems that we're all aware of that frankly plague our modern society. And you're not going to achieve the success that we all want to have when it comes to human capital and people operating and firing on all cylinders to the best of their ability from a neurocognitive standpoint if we don't have proper nutrition. So that is not maybe as exciting as what I get to do for a living and Dr. Sheth gets to do and putting stimulators into the human brain, but it actually affects all of society. social media, screen time, we've already mentioned that. I think that we're going to see legislation, frankly, in the next session. We had some last time to begin to address that, specifically when it comes to children. And last session, we addressed it more from the standpoint of some of the predatory behaviors that we're seeing online. And I think next session, it's going to involve schools. The third element is perhaps what we think about more commonly when we think about brain health. Parkinson's disease, movement disorders, Alzheimer's. Our population is living longer. And so those are items that are going to become more prevalent. And that's what I've been blessed to be a part of working on now for almost 3 decades. But from a legislative standpoint, I'm going to circle back to some of the things the first panel mentioned. Representative Luttrell talked about the value of young people. Another thing we have to keep in mind is that the birth rate in this state and in this country has fallen precipitously over the last decade. The birth rate is now around 1.7 to 1.6. We're below the replacement rate. And that is a very ominous sign. It's not specific to the U.S. Much of the world is experiencing this and has unfortunately been experiencing it for a longer time. But when you talk about young people and human capital, the value of having every person functioning to the best of their abilities is more critical than it's ever been. That won't entirely solve the problem that, for whatever reasons, people are not having children right now, but more today than at any time in our country's history, we cannot leave anyone behind. And that's why topics like this are so very important. Dr. Ling had mentioned that it's important to make something, other than money. Nothing wrong with making money, but I would share with you that there's an old saying, especially for, again, the young guys there. And if you're in the back, that's where I would have been sitting if I hadn't been told to sit here in the front where it's reserved, because you can see it all, right? You can take it all in, see how everybody's responding. Are they falling asleep? Are they awake? But if you love what you do, if you do something you're passionate about, you will never actually work a day in your life, and that's true. There's a brief story. I showed up one Monday on the floor of the Texas House in Austin, and I was late. I was about 15 minutes late. We were gaveling in at 2 o'clock. And some of my friends on the floor were kind of grousing about the meetings they had been in, and they were kind of tired. And I wasn't there on time. They said, "Well, what have you been doing? We had to register you in." And I said, "Yeah, I was in surgery." And that shut them down real quick. They didn't complain anymore about their meetings. But here's the thing, they thought that was a lot. They thought, gosh, you operated in the morning, drove 3 hours, and now you're here in your suit on the floor, and we're doing this stuff. But there's another way of looking at that. Who gets to do that? I mean, most people don't get to do either one of those things, much less both in one day. So for those of you that are trying to figure out what you want to do with your life, the money, believe it or not, will take care of itself. Okay, if you're really good at what you do, you will be in demand, period. And embrace those things that are going to make a difference in other people's lives. Don't be afraid to dream big and be bold, and do what you're passionate about and what you love doing. Innovation is critical. I mean, that's something we heard from Dr. Young, and of course, it's important to heal people. So what are we going to look at next legislative session? Well, we already talked about creating a strategy to fund neuroscience research in the state of Texas. I prefer an endowment approach, competitive model. I think CPRIT has already broken a lot of ground there. They had a near-death experience from some mishaps early on, and so there is no reason for us to repeat those mistakes, and we can capitalize on that and add to that an initiative in research in neurosciences. So I will be redoubling the efforts to do that, and I'm glad I have a couple colleagues here to hear that now, and we can talk more about that at another time. I think that when I talk to a lot of companies, one of the things I hear is if they're going to hire somebody with a PH level of education, the person is most likely going to come from out of country and almost certainly is going to come from out of state. And so the question is, why is that? And we have a couple of flagship public universities that have benefited hugely from the Permanent University Fund. We created a Texas University Fund last session so that we can go from having 2 top 50 public research institutions to 6, 7, 8. And that's not in a few years. That'll take, 30 years, but we are now charting that course, okay? But that's all focused on the institutions. It's focused on the faculty, on the infrastructure that they need. So I think it's time that we focus on the kids. I think one of the reasons that students don't pursue those advanced degrees is if you're in a STEM field, let's say you graduate with your degree in mechanical engineering, you can go make 6 figures straight out of college. These kids already have debt. They've been living like a college student. Maybe they want to get married. They don't want to live, like a freshman in college for another 4 years. They don't see the value proposition of getting their PhD. So one thing I would like to do is for us to focus on the students by providing them with support during that time that they pursue their graduate level degree in an institution, in a university in the state of Texas, and coordinating that with industry. So the state wouldn't just do that. I would ask the state, the universities, and the private companies to have some skin in the game. And you can grow your own. If you think over the next 5 years you're going to want to hire 4 PhDs in electrical engineering, well, guess what? You can have undergrads who've done internships with your company, who you have vetted and you're excited about. You can coordinate with them which institution in the state of Texas they're going to attend to get their PhD. We will help to pay their way, and in exchange for that, they're going to owe that company, 4 years after they get their degree. We also have an issue in industry where we have employees that can't pass the security clearance, and there's a real desire for that. So that would be another metric or requirement in participating in this degree. But an advanced degree or PhD type program that allows us to recruit and retain the best talent at our universities here in Texas. That's a second initiative that is definitely on my mind. And the third, which we've already mentioned, there's some school districts that are getting ahead of us, which is a fantastic thing. Starting this fall in many districts around this state, students are going to take their phones, they're going to put them in a secure place, and they're not going to have access to them until school is out at the end of the day. I think you're going to see legislation. I know you're going to see legislation next spring where the state is going to make that a statewide policy. I'm going to support that. I hope we can get it passed and across the finish line. I think the toll that these devices are taking on our young people and the way it's interfering with their education, and this is not 24/7. This is just allowing them to interact with one another and their teachers when they're at school. It's still going to be an issue outside of school. It's still going to be an issue for adults. But if we're really concerned about K through 12, we have to tackle this problem. I have it on my phone. I could share it with you guys. There's a wise teacher who got a big piece of cut out paper, put it on the whiteboard, and for her kids in the class, every time they received a notification, whether it was a text, Instagram notification, X, email, they put a mark during one school, one 50-minute period, and the paper is just covered, okay? And so these kids are in a classroom trying to learn, and they're getting pinged 100 times. There's no way you can focus and learn in that environment. So that will be another important piece of legislation that you're going to see us, address. I like this because as a surgeon, I like to do stuff. I like to fix things, and I like to take action. And we're going to have an opportunity in less than 12 months now to take action on all 3 of those items. So with that, I really, really thank you guys for putting this on. And I don't know if we have any time. I think somebody wanted to ask, do we have time for a question? Or Sure. Okay, one question. And I think some of us are going to stick around. Some may have to go, but there's a reception, so we can also talk afterwards. But go ahead.
You mentioned it earlier when you were introducing yourself that you were part of the appropriations committee and all of those
Mm-hmm.
and the legislative process involved in academia.
Yeah.
Just or volunteers. What can we do as regular citizens to help move this agenda along?
That's a great question, and I'm going to give you my basic advocacy spiel real quick, okay? So first of all, believe it or not, your elected representatives and senators actually do care what you think. Some people think that, oh, you know, I'm just one person, what could it matter? I have actually passed bills. Some of the most rewarding things that I've gotten to do were because a constituent came to me and said, you'll never believe what happened, or I've had this experience or this problem, and we need to tackle that. We're not sitting around thinking these things up. These are real world problems. And so you matter. Second, and this is really important, the ones who care the most about what you think are the people who you get to vote for, okay? And so you can go to any legislator's office, and those folks who are constituents go to the front of the line, all right? If you live in their district, they actually care what you think. I'm not saying that other representatives from around the state won't be somewhat interested in what you have to say, but I mean, if you're in Houston and you're visiting a rep from Amarillo, it's just in the same, okay? So the House member and the senator that represent you are the ones that you have the most pull with. And so if you're part of a group, you want to be strategic and say, hey, I just need you to reach out to your own representative and to your own senator, okay? Because you're going to have the most traction with them. From the state side, the other thing I would tell you is that you should build relationships with them soon. If there's a big vote coming up, or we're getting close to the end of session and we're going 90 miles an hour and people show up for the first time, it's not that it doesn't matter, but it's not the same as somebody that has, and I don't mean, come by every day, but just has taken some time before we ever showed up to build a relationship with the staff. By the way, the staff are super important. I have Cindy Butcher, who's fantastic. I couldn't function without her. Bridget Harton is my chief of staff in Austin. If you really want me to remember something, you had better tell one of them about it, okay? Because we're drinking from a fire hose. So be nice to the staff and realize that if you're asked to talk to staff, they're not just pawning you off on somebody. That may be the person who makes sure that your voice is heard and what you want to do actually gets done. But build a relationship with these people before January, okay? Before we actually show up and get into session. Because then what's going to happen is when you contact that office, they're going to be like, oh yeah, Miss Smith, I remember she came 6 months ago and told us how important this was. And they're going to know who you are. They're going to know what you're talking about and why it matters to you. And they're going to be responsive. And then the last thing that I'll say is that a standard policy in many offices is that we communicate back to people in the format in which they communicate to us. And so if somebody calls the office, we're going to call them back. If somebody sends an email, then they're going to get an email back. Now, if the email is a personal email where you can tell this person sat down and shared their personal thoughts with you, they're going to get a personal email in response to that. If we get 300 form emails that all read the exact same thing, we're going to draft a form response and we're going to send it back to the 300 people who sent the form back, okay? Same thing with faxes. If you just fax the office with something that your professional association said, put your name on this and send it, we'll respond to you, but we're not going to do a custom response to 1,000, form inquiries, if that makes sense. So those are just some thoughts, but don't underestimate yourself. But organize as a group, communicate with the people who represent you, and begin to communicate with them early. That would be my advice. Okay, thank you guys.
All right, we're getting to the end. Maybe everyone stand up for 30 seconds and just sort of get the blood flow going to your brain, because we just have like 10 minutes left. So just do a little dance, stretch, whatever you need to do. Activity is good for the brain. So I'm Harris. I'm going to talk a little bit later, very briefly, but I'm here to introduce Lawrence Jones, a very special guest who's flown in today. And I should say I'm the head of the Neuro Policy Program at the Baker Institute, which is the host of today. So it's great to meet everyone. Anyway, but Lawrence, please come up. Lawrence is very special because he actually works in the energy sector for the Edison Electric Institute. He's a senior leader there. And Lawrence invited me as a neuroscience guy to his Global Electrification Forum in DC at the start of the year to talk about brains and energy. And I was like, Lawrence, what am I doing talking to power and utility CEOs from around the world? And so now I'm returning the favor to Lawrence, and he's an energy guy here, and just fascinating the way Lawrence thinks and the mind meld that we've done between his position at Edison Electric Institute and my neuroscience approach. But anyway, Lawrence, please enlighten us with your thinking.
Thank you. Good afternoon or evening. First of all, this has been a great day for me. It's been a day of really learning a lot of stuff. And when I got up this morning and got on the plane to fly in from Washington, D.C., I kept asking myself, why am I doing this? Why am I going to go to a room with a bunch of neuroscientists? And I reminded myself that I guess Harris was thinking the same thing when he came to Washington, D.C. Why was he going to a room with a bunch of energy leaders from around the world? And listening to Congressman Luttrell and others who've spoken today, I made a long sort of a list of things to talk about on the flight. And I would tear it apart now because I can't tear my book, because I've gotten a couple of very interesting observations, being not a guy from this sector, so to speak. But there are a lot of similarities, and I want to touch upon a few of them that I think brought Harris and I together. Growing up in Liberia, West Africa, I was always intrigued by the brain. And the reason was because I like complex things, and the brain always seemed like the most complex thing for me growing up. And when I was doing my PhD, it was in complex systems at the Royal Institute of Technology. I was also intrigued by the fact that the brain, just like most complex systems, can play tricks on you. It can act it's unpredictable. It would do things like any complex dynamic system. And so that, growing up thinking about the brain, led me to reach a point in my life where I said to my wife a few years ago, and I told this to Harris, that I'm going to go back to college and get a second PhD in neuroscience. And people think when I say this, I'm crazy. And I actually believe I will do it, but I will do it a different way. I'm actually not going to go to the university. I'm going to do it by observation, by studying just because it's fun, because the brain is actually fun. And also by being very conscious of the fact that the things that affect the brain are the basic things that Jeff talked about earlier, like not getting enough sleep. I think you talk about it also, Congressman, all the simple things, right? And so what I've taken out of today's conversation, coming from the energy industry, being here in Houston, the capital city of the world when it comes to the clean energy transition, I had originally titled my little remarks to say brain capital in the energy transition. But after listening to Congressman Luttrell and others, I will change it around and saying brain capital and the key to saving the world. And I say that because the brain that we've talked about today is not just about all the scientific work that's being done here at Rice. It's about the decision-making process that governs the world. And as I'm thinking about young people today, and I'm thinking what was discussed earlier, if the brain is not fit for making decisions, the world is in trouble. And I live in Washington, D.C. Actually, I live outside of D.C., but I work in D.C., make that clear. And you see sometimes that policymakers, and this is no disrespect to the congressman or anyone here, but I'm sure they will agree with me, you sometimes wonder, the decisions being made, are they being made with fit minds or fit brains? No. Because what's sometimes missing in those decision making are just thinking holistically and thinking systematically about the impact that one decision has on everything else. That is not making decisions in silos, it's about making decisions that affects the whole. And because the brain controls our entire body. For me, systems thinking is about making decisions that affect the whole. As an energy guy, the electricity system, we have about 90 members around the world, including Centerpoint here in Texas is also a member of EI. I travel a lot around the world and I get to see how the electricity system is the brain of the economy. And as I was taking notes today, I was always asking myself, how can we use the knowledge of the brain to design more efficient energy systems? Because I think when you said, Professor, how the brain, how 15 volts or 50 millivolts, I guess you said, can make all of this processing work and do it efficiently, I was thinking to myself, man, imagine if we could design efficient energy systems that have no political colors, but energy systems that are designed based on science, based on the facts, based on even how the brain works. So, I was making a lot of notes here to take back to the folks in the energy sector today and say, look, guys, I spent a day with a bunch of brainiacs people. And one of the key takeaways is that there's a lot we can learn from the brain, or from neuroscience, as we design future energy systems, as we design future energy policies, not just for the US, but for the world. The Provost talked about the Yaoundé agreement that has been signed thanks to the hard work of Harris. If we don't get brain fitness across the world, it doesn't matter what we do in Texas. Because craziness doesn't stay away. Craziness travels. Craziness goes all over the place. So if we could get more brain-fitted leaders around the world, it will actually make the world a better place. Because if you think of some of the wars we're seeing around the world today, I would say it's because we have people with unfit brains. Because the things they're doing, the decisions they're making, makes no logical sense. And as we think about the United Nations going there in September, I won't be there unfortunately, but Harris and others will be there. I hope the key message coming out of Rice and out of this symposium will be that world leaders need to take their own brain fitness seriously. And when you're making decisions, the way the brain works, the brain is one of the most forward-thinking organ in the body. There's one thing I've learned from Harris, that the brain is so forward-thinking. If we just listen to it and let it guide our thinking, we'll actually do better things as human beings. But unfortunately, we spend so much time looking backwards as human beings. So when we're making decisions, we cannot anticipate what's going to happen. The brain does it for us, which is why the brain, the cells behave in a way that allows it to protect us from doing bad things to ourselves. But we have not developed the ability to make decisions looking forward. So all our decisions we make as policymakers, as decision makers, as business leaders, is always looking backwards and not looking forward. My last point I will make, because I'm standing between you and Harris and the drinks, is I was so impressed today when we went around the labs. I did my PhD several years ago at the Royal Institute of Technology. And I remember one of the things that was so interesting was you don't realize what the work you're doing is going to lead to. The research you're doing, you don't realize the impact it's going to have on someone's life until years later, then you realize, like, wow. And what I saw today was so mind-blowing. Tomorrow, I'm actually going to be interviewing a lady called Sally Addy, who wrote a book called We Are Electric. Ironically, the book is about how the body is like a grid. The cells in your body behaves the same way as electricity, in the sense that you have the ion channels letting electricity flow through your body. Why was that interesting for me when I invited her to be on this thing we have called Influential Minds? Was because I am so curious in understanding how the body works, how the brain works, how everything works, because I can take that knowledge and carry it back to how we design energy systems. And I think today, going around to the labs and seeing what's happening and some of the questions being asked by the congressmen and others has inspired me to commit to working with Harris, because we didn't know each other. We connected on LinkedIn. And when I invited him, I remember my staff saying to me, Lawrence, this guy is a brain guy. What is he coming to do at an energy conference? When he spoke, he was surrounded by utility executives because they said, wow, this is astonishing. Now, I'm not hoping you guys will surround me after I speak today because I'm not as interesting as he was. But on a serious note, I think the industries needs to start thinking across boundaries. This is not an energy system discussion or neuroscience discussion. We should think across silos. And I was so impressed to see one of the departments that had electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, all working together. I think from a public policy standpoint, the last thing I would say, and I'm saying it because I would love to connect with congressmen when I get back to DC, because there should be the neuroscience caucus in Congress should be the biggest caucus in Congress. Because there's nothing so significant for us than to understand how the brain works. And so, Congressman, I will do my best to see how we can get the energy sector to work with you to increase the number of congressional people who are participating in the caucus. Because I think if we can get them to participate, we can start developing the workforce that we need for the energy transition. We can start developing the investments we need to get the support for brain health, not just because it's for the United States, but I'm very concerned about the global South. I'm very concerned about Africa, Latin America, and those places, because poverty, which you talk about, unless we can eradicate poverty, the brain health of the world is going to be in trouble. So, Harris, it was great to get up early this morning to get here. And thanks for having me. I've learned a lot and looking forward to the reception. Thank you.
This is something that Nathan planned as a good one, and it's. But it reminds me that my wife and I, when we first met in Houston, we matched on a dating app, and one of my photos on the dating app was 4 of them were me, but one of them was a koala bear wearing a Hawaiian shirt. So it's very apt. And normally I get portrayed as another Australian animal, a dingo. Someone in this room who I won't mention referred to me like, Harris, how did you develop this brain economy construct? You're like a dingo walking around the Australian outback, picking up burrs and spurs of disciplines and fields and experts and bringing them all together. So anyway, so to get serious now, beyond my dad jokes, my Australian animal jokes, I'd like to thank everyone for being here. It means a lot. You guys are, you're all very busy, but particularly our speakers today are all what I would consider blue ribbon speakers. So it really does mean a lot, your support of the Neuropolicy program. Thank you very much to Nathan Cook, who did a lot of work everyone knows behind the scenes. Nathan, you're an honorary fellow of the Neuropolicy program. Nearly. We'll talk about it. So I just want to make a couple of closing remarks to say that, let me just respond to Lawrence. Neuroscience can learn a lot from clean energy. The clean energy transition that is led out of Houston is all about transitioning from traditional fuel-based energy to clean energy. It requires a transition, public sector, private sector, philanthropy, and Houston is doing all of this, we all know. It requires science and technology, engineering, workforce changes. It's about investing, and it's about regulating certain things and taxing certain things. So this is the clean energy economic transition, and one of the things Congressman has sort of tasked many people with doing, and I took it very seriously, is how do we get brain area people in America to work together towards a common goal? And so the brain economy transition is this recognition the current economic model that we have is brain unhealthy. The cost of mental and neurological conditions across the life is $2.2 trillion to the global economy in healthcare costs and lost productivity. So if we're going to get from a brain unhealthy state of our economy to a brain healthy state, we also need public, private, philanthropic. It's science and tech that we all toured today. It's workforce change. It's potentially things like regulation, like you mentioned, social media, for example. So hopefully America, as we think about the brain economy transition, this is something that all brain area stakeholders could get behind. And if we have this successful brain economy transition, we're unlocking people's brain health so that kids can learn better, people in the workplace can upskill and reskill, and that gives us what we need for other skill-based activities, science and technology, supercomputing, clean energy transition, et cetera. So that's the model, Congressman, that we're sort of developing and leading through the Baker Institute, and would love to discuss more about what does this mean. The Biden administration has their bioeconomy economic model. Could this be in the next administration of the White House, the brain economy economic model that we start to engineer? And obviously it needs a lot of work, a lot of analysis and science and engineering to develop it, but it could be something potentially that we could all explore. And so, let me just conclude by saying that I think this is a historic moment that we have. All the speakers you've heard from, all of the different thinking about clinical issues and solutions and non-clinical mis and disinformation, et cetera. We have a historic opportunity for Houston to lead this revolution, or let's call it a renaissance of neuroscience, from the different levels of Rice level, TMC level, Houston level, Texas level, US level, and also at the United Nations level. We have endorsements from the government of Cameroon around this work, who's also chairing the UN General Assembly this year. So I think the time is now, and I encourage you all, if you're interested, to say hello, keep in touch with us, and thank you for your support in the coming weeks and months. So thank you all, and now we have a treat from Nathan for some reception afterwards.